Number 10. Black Widow and the Invisible Woman. Starting off our list with something new and mild from the Invisible Woman solo series. This recasts her past as a secret agent. So before she married Reed, she worked for S.H.I.E.L.D. and ran covert ops, which with her power set actually makes a lot of sense. The story thus far is that her past partner has gone missing and she's gonna break all the rules to go behind enemy lines to find him. This involves her teaming up with Black Widow, who suddenly has a massive chip on her shoulder about superheroes. So Sue has to prove herself to her. She has to prove that she's not like other superheroes. Natasha, are you okay? You've been on so many superhero teams. I know you're a clone, but you have all the memories of the other Nat, who Hydra Cap killed. So these two just have beef until Sue proves herself to her by faking a drinking contest. So it's low, because it's not full hate or sustained, but it's odd. This is a 5-issue mini, by the way. It's pretty good. Check it out if you have the time. This is manufactured conflict. Manufactured conflict is manufactured. Does Nat not remember the time Sue fought the entire Avengers team to a standstill after the government took her kids and forced them out of the Baxter building? Reed's just noped out of that. He knows better than to try and stop an angry Sue. Number 9. Hal Jordan and Batman. So Green Lantern and Batman, since they started teaming up in the late Silver Age, Brave and the Bold, there has been friction. Batman has never fully appreciated Hal's attitude, which ranges from cavalier to I'm doing exactly what the Guardians tell me. But this really came to a head when Hal went evil. And also there's some beef from Hal's side from the time he was desperate enough to go to Bruce for help with his alcoholism and just got turned away. Post-Parallax, Bruce wanted nothing to do with Spectre Hal and didn't trust him at all. And when he came back to life, he still didn't trust him and then got extra mad because everybody judged him for it. But honestly, he had good reason. Just because all the people you killed came back to life doesn't mean you didn't kill them in the first place. Eventually, these two would find an even keel through an, in my opinion, contrived sequence where Bruce couldn't handle a power ring despite having wielded one multiple times before. All of this ended up being shifted more into frenemy mode in the New 52, where all of a sudden these two were all about each other. Bruce revealed his identity on purpose to Hal first, he lets Hal fly him places. I don't know, I have questions. I notice things. Other people are like, oh, where's Darkseid? And I'm like, is Hal's hand around Bruce's waist? Enhance image. No shame in my game. We all make our own fun. Number 8. Hawkman and Green Arrow. So Carter Hall and Oliver Queen hate each other for the same reason that Hal and Ollie should hate each other, but the comics insist they don't. A fundamental difference of opinion. Green Arrow leans really left, to the point where he just yells at Hal, for example, for being a space cop and for listening to the Guardians, ever. He just yells at him and calls him stupid and a stick in the mud, all kinds of things, but they're best friends? Like, what is going on with Hal's self-esteem? You don't have to take that. Anyway, Hawkman leans more right. These terminologies are stateside ones, by the way. These terms mean different things depending upon where you are in the world. So these two butt heads, or they did pre-Flashpoint. Post-Flashpoint in the New 52, except we mostly forget this was a thing. These two used to have some huge blow-up arguments. It's mostly been forgotten because of the struggle of what do we do with these characters in the first place. Just never forget, Oliver Queen will scream in your face if you have a different opinion than him on social issues, but when push comes to shove and he finds out his ward is a drug addict, he will slap him across the face and kick him out. So, all talk, huh? Number 7. Jean Grey and Emma Frost. This comes to us from New X-Men, the Grant Morrison run. And the genesis of this one, we've talked about it numerous times at this point. Jean and Cyclops were having problems. Emma, fresh off surviving the Genoshan genocide, started giving him psychic therapy. During this point, the two started having a psychic affair, an affair where she would masquerade as Jean as the Phoenix. It was all kinda messed up. So when Jean found out about all this, she was understandably upset. Less understandably, she psychically tortured Emma because of it. When Jean lets her powers go, she's terrifying. Full stop. Anybody who questions how she uses them has a long history to call back upon. This conflict would be solved through plot convenience. Jean would just kinda become the Phoenix and poof away. Now that description will bother some people who really felt the gravitas of her sacrifice, but different strokes for different folks. Maybe I'm Zorn. I was Zorn the whole time. Who wasn't Zorn but was Zorn. Number 6. Captain Marvel and Iron Man. This is Carol Danvers' Captain Marvel, who is currently having a villain arc in the comics at the time of this recording. A purposeful one, not one by accident. And it's a good play. Lean into it. Play with it, that's smart marketing. Anyway, despite years of friendship, her and Tony fell through over Minority Report. I mean, an Inhuman, Ulysses, who could tell the future. And when Rhodey died as a driving plot force, who was dating Carol at the time, it was on. She felt she could have prevented it if she knew the future. Tony was all, I don't agree. Also, I was the antagonist in the last Civil War. It's not a good look, don't do it. She was all, screw you. I'm starting a teenage Gestapo and getting several people killed. Get ready to be beaten into a coma, Care Bear. He calls her Care Bear, so I'm flipping it back. Yeah, Yeah, this was intense. The Civil War arcs go hard. You go from fighting alongside someone to contemplating murdering them. However, unlike the first Civil War, they scrambled to undo any lasting character damage, so Tony just got over it. I built myself a new body, it's fine. Number 5, Namor and Black Panther. Two kings fighting over whose kingdom is better and who should have mastery. Also, they just really clash personality-wise. It takes a decent amount of ego to rule, and T'Challa handles his with more grace than Namor, who can at times fall into megalomania and just slips into straight up villainy sometimes too. Still, these two can also respect each other. You can make their relationship fairly malleable. But well, they've fought for decades, and fans have a very let them fight mentality, alongside a who would win. Black Panther stabbed Namor that one time. Namor's been killed a few times actually. Beheaded by Hyperion once. Ouch. Number 4, Batman and the Red Hood. So this is a more one-sided hate, as when Jason Todd came back to life, Batman's feelings were very conflicted, but Jason had had years to nurse his hate, a festering rage that had started long before he died, exacerbated by seeing that his death had changed nothing in Bruce's methods, that he'd been replaced by another Robin, that the Joker still lived. Red Hood was more than happy to kill to accomplish what he felt Batman could not, and go up against the rest of the Bat family. It made him dangerous, as did the fact that Bruce still cared about him. Batman doesn't do feelings the best though, so the anger eventually manifested mutually. These days Jason is in more of a black sheep capacity, but these two still aren't good. Batman backhanded him that one time in Rebirth. Just why do people keep having him do that? Stop it. Number 3, Hawkeye and the Swordsman. Yeah, classic beef. So Hawkeye was a villain before he eventually had a change of heart. Now the Swordsman actually started off as a villain for Hawkeye. He had actually trained Hawkeye when the two were both villains. At that point he was called Trickshot, which is a better name. So when the Swordsman wanted to join the Avengers, obviously Clint didn't trust him and kept a close eye on him, which led to him being denied entry, which then led to him kidnapping Captain America. So yeah, hate justified. The Swordsman has been on the Avengers since though, so I guess he got what he wanted. Number 2, Reed Richards and Thor. So this occurred during the first Civil War, Civil War 1. Thor was dead at this point, and so the pro-registration side felt that they needed something on their side, a big heavy hitter, some brawn. They needed some muscle. The Hulk was in space, kept there by them. This is leading up to Planet Hulk. So Reed thought, what if we just clone Thor? I have the tech, I have the DNA, I can do anything really. And Tony was like, yeah, go for it. This is why we're such good friends. Needless to say, when Thor found out about all this, he wasn't happy. He was furious. This messed up their relationship for a while, and justifiably so. Stop cloning people. Most people don't want to be cloned. Bad blood. Also, Thor didn't even want to be on that side, so double blow. Civil War, what a time, both times. I can't wait for Civil War 3. Number 1, She-Hulk and Star Fox. So She-Hulk hates Star Fox for a couple of reasons, like influencing her emotions and making her believe she was in love with John Jameson, Werewolf Jameson, and so she married him. She found this out while she was trying to discover if Star Fox had used his powers on her to make her sleep with him. This was while she was defending him for his other rapes that he had committed canonically because Thanos implanted memories in him that made him doubt himself, but not even the real Thanos. It was not the strongest plot. Jen is justifiably angry about all of this, but also at herself because he didn't influence her in the defending of him or the sleeping with him department. She changed her whole life after finding out about her and John though. She divorced John. It hurt how she could perceive her own thoughts. I hate him too. Cupid powers showcased in the grossest way. This is the plot that for many ruined Star Fox, while others are like, it's the writer's fault, not Star Fox. Share your thoughts. Number 10, Wonder Woman and Spider-Man. No, I didn't fall and hit my head, nor am I just some fake nerd girl noob. These two met in the sequel, spiritual sequel to Spider-Man and Superman's first team-up. In their first team-up, they fought Lex Luthor and Doc Ock, who had kidnapped their ladies and also were planning to blow up the Earth. So this first team-up was Superman versus the Amazing Spider-Man, and the sequel is just Superman and Spider-Man. Just them hanging out. It was bigger with more heroes and Doctor Doom flaunting his diplomatic immunity. However, at one point during this, Spider-Man ended up meeting Wonder Woman and basically his brain melted and he went va-va-voom, so much woman, and just hit on her constantly. Meanwhile, she had bought into the media hype by the Bugle that he was essentially a supervillain. And so the two fought, but they sorted it out quickly. He still hits on her for the rest of it though. I can imagine Wonder Woman being one of the many heroes who find Spider-Man annoying. So this is low, cause the hate was brief, bright, and then over. Mostly I just wanted to tell you this happened. It's one of my fave crossovers, mostly because Doom and Superman have a really deep conversation about the responsibilities about walking the earth as essentially a god. Friends, who knew? Number 9, Bishop and Gambit. So Bishop was really convinced for a time that Gambit was the traitor he was looking for who had betrayed the X-Men and led to their downfall and hence the dystopian future that he came from. So why did he think this? Well, Bishop was born and raised in this future and he was taken in by a man named LeBeau, which we know to be Gambit, Remy's last name. The man who raised him was also known as the Witness, the last person to have seen the X-Men alive. Later, Bishop would come across a recording of Jean Grey, who said the X-Men had been destroyed by a traitor on the inside, which led him to suspect the Witness. When he traveled back in time and met the X-Men, he came to believe that Gambit was a younger version of the Witness and fought him, and proceeded to attempt to warn anyone who would listen about him, and also just give him side-eye constantly. Gambit of course responded in kind. No one likes being accused of potential future crimes. You hear that, Carol? No one. It would later come out that Gambit was not a traitor, so these two would squash their beef. Number 8. Guy Gardner and Fire. This occurred during their time on the JLI, the Justice League International. So Guy used to be really nice, up until he received brain damage fighting Sinestro. When the writers brought him back, they felt they had to do something to cure what they called his terminal blandness, which is harsh. So they gave him a brash, rude new tooth. But since it was the result of brain damage by comic logic, if he got conked on the head again, it could just be reversed. And that's what happened. Then him and Ice, the best friend of Fire, started going out. Best friend in quotes, there's some hints there about other things going on. However, when he reverted back to his now established Guy ways, she wasn't into that, but she felt that she had seen the true man and hence was motivated to stay with him, even though he frequently embarrassed her or made her uncomfortable. This made Fire not like Guy very much at all, and while he didn't appreciate her butting into his relationship, this would all be solved, including the eventual Superman Guy Ice triangle, by Ice dying. That's one way to end a feud. The writers would later go on to say that her death was a mistake, an attempt at drama that fell flat. Number 7. Black Widow and Black Widow. While when most think of Black Widow, they think of Natasha Romanoff, there is another. This second Black Widow is Yelena Belova. While she and Nat would become allies, they started off as actual enemies. Both of them were raised and trained in the Red Room, and Yelena felt that she was the one who should hold the title of Black Widow, not Natasha. Nat would eventually have to use manipulation to make Yelena see that being the Black Widow was not this amazing pinnacle to aspire to. These two would, as I said, eventually get along, but it was a really rocky start, with Yelena viewing Natasha as a traitor, and the latter seeing the former as deluded. I'm gonna introduce Yelena to the MCU, so I have a question. How many of you are Yelena fans, or even knew about her? Small random test sample survey, go! Number 6. Storm and Emma Frost. Emma and Storm have beef, and Storm gets along with Doom, so that's saying something. Although, is it? Lots of people get along with Doom. Doctor Strange stayed at his castle with him when they went to rescue Doom's mom, and they had a nice time, at least it seemed like it. They had a nice dinner. I want to have dinner with Doom. So when Emma was the White Queen of the Hellfire Club, she tortured Storm, trying to force information from her mind. Emma even pulled the, I don't want to hurt you, I want us to be friends. So obviously, when Emma joined the team and would later rise to a role of leadership within it, a role that Storm has herself occupied at points, the best points in my opinion, she would clash with Storm. Also, Emma gives her grief for being royal and is all, Your Highness? You were the White Queen of a supervillain club. These two have fought multiple times and Emma has lost. So you can write these two as cordial, but I don't know, I like their kind of drama. A little friction is fun, not everyone should get along perfectly. It's okay for some characters to not let everything go. Number 5. The Hulk and the Thing. Halfway through with a classic battle. Many fans will remember these big brawls between the Hulk and the Thing. Fun fact, the Hulk was actually inspired by the success of the Thing in the Fantastic Four. Fans very much have a let them fight mentality. The Hulk freaks Ben out. Classic Hulk, that is, with how brainless and mindless he is. It's like looking into an uncomfortable funhouse mirror, because they are so similar. Early Hulk hated most people. Hulk smash and all that. But these two would eventually become friends, and it's sweet. Ben needs more friends. Friends who don't turn him into rock monsters. It's understandable why people still think they hate each other though. They just fought again the other day in a fight that made me cringe for the Thing. He got so hurt and it looked so painful. The rock part came off and it exposed his fleshy underbelly. This looked really painful. Number 4. Kitty Pryde and Emma Frost. Yes, Emma made the list twice. Look, a lot of people have problems with her. Take it up with them. This is again because of Emma's time as a villain. Kitty met her for the first time when she was young and Emma had imprisoned them, and she never forgot it and hasn't really forgiven. Kitty finds Emma to be cold, cruel, and manipulative and doesn't trust her. She's made sure that she can best her, and Emma is a little afraid of her. I mean, you should be afraid of someone who hates you so passionately and openly. But sometimes Emma has proved her right. On Emma's side, she's a bit colder about it, but it's hard to like someone who hates you and makes such a loud show of it, also rips your heart out. Their fights are really cool though. Phasing fights are always great, and then you add a psychic element to that and you've got a great matchup. Number 3, The Punisher and Batman. Yes, another crossover. The Punisher and Batman have met, teamed up, and hated almost every second of it, and I'm pretty sure you can guess why. They pretty much have the polar opposite philosophies when it comes to how to handle crime. Punisher's is, well, bullet to the head, and Batman's is reformation, take them to Arkham, they can all be saved, I won't become what they are. This all came to a head when Batman actually saved the Joker from Punisher. He got in between them, between the Punisher, the gun, and Joker, and then told the Joker to run for his life. Frank fights him for a bit at first, but then just becomes so disgusted with him that he tells him that him and the Joker deserve each other, and just leaves. Ouch. Batman on his side thinks the Punisher is unhinged and belongs in Arkham. Punisher/Batman Deadly Nights was a good read. Number 2, The Darkness and Witchblade. Yes, we're leaving Marvel and DC for a moment. I know it's a September 26th miracle. I filmed it that day. What kind of miracle is it? Whenever you're watching it, it's that day's miracle. So the Witchblade is actually conceived as the result of a truce liaison between the Darkness, a cosmic entity, and Angelus, the embodiment of God's light, whom the Darkness resents for bringing life into the empty chaos that had been its domain. The Darkness would begin inhabiting human hosts as time went on, passing itself down through a chosen bloodline, always male. He would still bear the grudge against Angelus and manifest that in his attitude to those who wielded the Witchblade. Their confrontations are violent, dangerous, and at times oddly sexual, because Witchblade is, if you've seen Witchblades, it's a lot. It's an intriguing relationship that will span all of time, played out through human hosts. Number 1, Cyclops and Wolverine. All of you from part 1 were like, Sasha, Cyclops and Wolverine hate each other? Everyone knows this. And yes, they do. But they were on rivalries. But yes, this has crossed the line into hate on more than one occasion, and is part of what people know about them, so they deserve to be on here too. How do they hate each other? Let me count the ways. They were fighting over the same woman, yes, but that's only part of it. A small part. They have fundamentally different personalities, and even with her gone, they still fight with each other. Scott is uptight and wound so tight he could snap, and he does sometimes. He leads through countermeasures, so oftentimes as an opposing force rather than an inspiring one. He kowtows to authority and loves rules and order. Wolverine is a much more free agent, driven by passion, thumbing his nose at authority, and is softer than he would first appear on the surface. He also feels that Scott is a bit of a hypocrite. This is cause when push comes to shove, Cyclops is usually pretty happy to let Wolverine do the things that he can't. Here's the thing, these two can also be friends. It's a weird dynamic where just a few things would need to shift and they'd be a terrifying, unstoppable duo. So it's probably a good thing most of the time that they can't see their way clear to that. Number 10, Batwoman and Cassandra Cain. Cassandra Cain is one of the women to take up the mantle of Batgirl after Barbara Gordon. Initially mute and trained from birth to be an assassin, she would find herself taken in by Batman and learning his code, and really being treated very much as a daughter. She would come to have great respect for the whole Bat family and what they stood for, so she's not here for people breaking their code. Enter Batwoman. The modern Batwoman is a new take on the first one. Both are named Kathy Kane. The first Batwoman, however, was created purely as a love interest to prove that Batman and Robin were no homo. When she came back, she was her own character, and a lesbian as an FU to seduction of the innocent. But she's also post-New 52, more set against the Bat family, all like, yeah, I took your symbol, your name, and your costume, but we have nothing to do with each other. Also, sometimes I'm your cousin. Sure, Jan. The thing with her is that she's far more open to killing, which set her against Cassandra for a bit, who had a full breakdown, crying about how their symbol that they wear means something and how dare she disrespect it. And then Bruce gave Batwoman the most disappointed dad stare of all life. I love when characters have the conflict they should based on their personalities instead of the whole, we're in the same group, we should stick together. Nah fam, give me interpersonal drama between the people who would have it. Number 9, Simon, Baz, and Batman. Speaking of codes and the like, why if it isn't Batman having words with yet another Green Lantern? Just he should write an angry letter to the Guardians. Please have Mogo pick better ring bearers, sincerely an angry vigilante who has to work with them. So when Simon first started, he was from a bit of a rougher area and had a bit more of an aggressive stance on what a Green Lantern could be, so he used to carry a gun. And well, you know how Batman felt about that. Batman has a big no-no for guns, unless it's the Snyderverse, or Batman Odyssey, or some other exceptions. So Batman was all, it's not necessary, and legit his trauma aside, it kinda isn't. I mean, you have a ring that can construct anything you can conceive of, and you could use it to be a gun if you really wanted it to be, so it's kinda redundant, but that's just me. Number 8, Rogue and Dazzler. Rogue and Dazzler have some classic beef from when Rogue was still a supervillain and she absorbed Dazzler's powers, which you know some people get over and others don't. But this feud would continue even after Rogue was on the X-Men, but it would morph into a kind of tramp, hussy shame-off of them calling each other names and who was hotter and who was dressed more like a trollop. It was a moment, that's for sure. I got called a tart the other day and was more taken aback by the throwback than anything else. Like, what's next? A dame? A broad? Dazzler is one of those interesting characters where she's been around for decades now and has had many arcs and plots, and yet some people outside of comics are still like, who? So do you like both serious life or death fights but also petty cat fights? Cause these two have both. Number 7. Rick Grayson and the Bat Family. My goodness, an actual chance to talk about Rick Grayson? Oh joy. So Rick Grayson is renamed Dick Grayson after he got shot in the head by the KG Beast and got amnesia. Afterwards he couldn't remember who he was, but was suddenly filled with a Dan Didio-like certainty that his name shouldn't be Dick. And also, he didn't really want anything to do with the rest of the Bat Family. This is a split which has caused them great pain. Well, I mean, it would have bothered Bruce if he was in character, but he's too busy doing yoga on the beach. So despite not really wanting anything to do with his family, Rick is still a vigilante. In fact, there's a whole Nightwing group. Nightwing Gold, Nightwing Blue, Nightwing Red. Power Rangers assemble. So he's kinda in a Jason role right now, and maybe he'll be the new Talon, we'll see. Wake me up when the hate is over. Yes, it's one-sided, they all miss and love him. Poor Damien. His father abandoned him to go paddleboarding and grow a mustache, and his brother and father figure doesn't remember who he is. The name's Grayson. Rick Grayson. Number 6. Speaking of the Bat Family, we need some pre-New 52 drama with Jason Todd and Tim Drake. Jason Todd had a lot of strong feelings about Tim because, well, he was his replacement, or at least that's how Jason viewed it. He used to call Tim the Pretender, and he was out to hurt him as much as possible. He would actually shoot him in the knee or batarang him in the knee. There was serious knee injury. He took an arrow to the knee during the battle for the cowl. Tim should be permanently limping, thank goodness for comics. Tim started off not actively hating Jason, but after seeing the pain he was causing, plus being on the receiving end of Jason's at the time unhinged rage, responded in kind. These days, Tim and Jason have a better relationship, definitely eased by the fact that there is now an even newer Robin on the scene, Damian. Now him and Tim can bond. Jason was quite the big emotional catalyst when he first came back. Now he lives in a kind of limbo. People love him though. If you dare suggest anything bad about Jason, prepare for people to come for you, lock your doors, delete your search history. It's gonna get real intense. Number 5. Captain America and the Punisher. Midway through, we have some one-sided and kinda sad but understandable hate. The Punisher really admires Captain America, which is understandable. A lot of people in the Marvel Universe do. But Captain America, he is not here for Frank's methods, his brutality, his killing, his unwillingness to forgive, any of it. They had a really awkward fight in Civil War I, wherein the Punisher didn't fight back when him and Steve fought. That always makes the aggressor look terrible. The sad man is a great defense tactic, it gets the crowd on your side. There was also a what if story wherein Frank Castle was chosen to be Captain America over Falcon, for reasons. After Steve lost an arm, and that was apparently beyond the pale, they needed a whole new Cap. Metal arms are for anti-heroes, and Thor. Cap would find a way to convince Frank to change his ways in that story, but in main verse that is yet to occur. And it won't. A well-adjusted Punisher? He'd be cancelled. Number 4. Raven and the Justice League. Silly Justice League, not trusting people just cause they're an interdimensional portal for their monster destroyer world's father. Stop sipping on all that haterade. No matter the iteration, the Justice League is always at first wary of Raven. She's powerful and if unhinged could destroy the whole world, or prove to be the means for her father to do so. Raven doesn't hate the Justice League really, especially not in the new Teen Titans, but she will defend herself when push comes to shove. And there was an all-out battle between the two groups, Teen Titans and the League, because her father's influence did come through. So yeah, I understand why the League is concerned, but Raven works hard to not be evil, and most of the time it works. You know, unless it's Dick and Corey's wedding. Number 3. Rogue and the Scarlet Witch. Finally, Rogue having a problem with someone else and not the other way around. So back in the day, Wanda nearly erased all mutants from existence. I said back in the day, that wasn't that far back, but still. This was by uttering the phrase, "no more mutants." Mutants were on the run, hunted, it was a terrible time. And then a lot of the Marvel Universe just got over it, but not Rogue. Rogue doesn't forgive and forget quite so easily. And you know what else doesn't? House of X. It makes sense, especially with the new canon, that Wanda isn't a mutant, which hashtag not my Wanda, but I digress. Rogue has come for Scarlet Witch more than once over this, and Wanda will defend herself, but also she has a lot of guilt over this, but it's more of a gee, I should learn to wield magic better so I don't almost nearly commit another near genocide. Number 2. Captain America and the US Agent. Whenever I put the US Agent on a list, people come for me. How dare you, he saved my family, we have lunch every month, he's a real hero. But Captain America and the US Agent, there is friction there. The US Agent would actually take up Cap's mantle for a bit, but he believed in far more brutal and decisive measures than Steve ever had. And it got to the point where Steve had to come out of retirement and take the mantle back because he felt that John was abusing it and staining it, while John felt he was utilizing his position to the fullest potential and that Steve was weak and soft. Also, when John first was introduced, he was a Captain America villain called the Super Patriot. He's gonna be in the Disney Plus series, so get excited for that. And number 1. Cyclops and Captain America. Avengers vs. X-Men. What a time. So the plot. Cliff Notes time. The Phoenix Force has crashed on Earth, looking for Hope Summers as a host, because the Summers' children are the only ones who matter except when they don't. The X-Men and Avengers differ on what to do about the Phoenix Force. This is post No More Mutants, so Hope comes to be viewed as like a mutant messiah. Her and the Phoenix Force combined will heal mutants and save the species, while the Avengers think that the Phoenix Force will destroy the Earth, while Cyclops and Cap would be the ones who played out this conflict the most. And Cap's strict adherence to what the government and S.H.I.E.L.D. wanted would burn a bridge between him and Cyclops, and also fuel that resentment in Scott. It's still there, and it would really start to crystallize his segregationist views that mutants and humans had separate interests, that humans couldn't be trusted, and that they should be separate. And well, Scott, he just rubs people the wrong way in general, so it's not hard to return the hate.
Number 10. Hawkeye and Winter Soldier. Hawkeye and Winter Soldier are forced to team up in the Tales of Suspense. Both seem to be on the case of tracking down Natasha, aka Black Widow, or someone who is acting as her copycat and killing off Hydra agents, as Natasha is supposed to be dead. It turns out that they are right and that she did die, but also she came back as a clone. Always clones. Turns out the Red Room made copies of her in case she was ever killed, and that they do this so they never truly lose an agent. This is that awful clone thing I'm always talking about in videos, if you remember that, in regards to Black Widow. Black Widow ends up getting her memories restored by a bear. Yes, you heard right, a bear. Natasha comes up with a plan to take down the Red Room, but tries to keep Clint and James out of it, as she knows they'll only get in her way. The two continuously bicker in this saga, and when Clint first runs into Bucky, he actually introduces him by confessing that he kind of hates him. Although it's odd because this is never really fully explained as to why they both don't really like each other. I guess it's because they both dated Black Widow, like they're both her exes, or just because maybe they're very different people. They both put up with each other long enough to complete their mission, and then pretty much immediately part ways. Number 9. Catwoman and Zatana. Zatana did a mind wipe of Dr. Light, and as such had to mind wipe Batman because he ran in and tried to stop her while she was in the middle of it. Being a powerful magic user has its consequences. You can do great things, powerful things, but you know, people are going to judge you for it. When what she had done came to light, pun not intended there, Batman especially was pretty upset with her. His trust had been broken and his friendship with Zatana had been ruined. Granted, he still wanted to work with her. When Catwoman found out that Zatana had also tampered with her mind, and as such changed the entire direction of her life, well, she was beyond livid. She didn't want to hear Zatana out, who had come to confess and apologize. She wanted to just move on, and when that didn't seem possible, she wanted to fight. Zatana says to Catwoman, "I understand why you hate me," but Catwoman responds, "Hate is a strong word, Zatana, and it's not even close to strong enough to describe what I think of you." Woo! Number 8. Tim Drake and Azrael. Really, I could also include Nightwing in there too, as both Robins were not a fan of Azbat. Azrael took up the Batman mantle after Bruce had his back broken by Bane in the events of Nightfall. Bruce decided to leave the mantle in Jean-Paul's capable hands, but becoming Batman drove Jean-Paul to madness. Tim disagrees with the fact that Azrael kills criminals that he goes up against, and he says as much to him, which gets them in a fight. Azrael even feels bad whenever he loses his temper with Robin, but Tim just feels like he is a dangerous, ticking time bomb. When Bruce came back and saw that Gotham seemed to be fairly free of crime, I mean as free of crime for Gotham as anyone can expect anyways, he expressed leaving Azbat in the role and retiring from the vigilante life. Tim was amazed and confessed that Azbat had killed. Later, Nightwing also got involved, and the three decided that Azrael needed to be stopped. Bad Azbat. Number 7. Batman and Guy Gardner. The hatred between these two goes back to the old days of the Justice League International. Guy constantly nagged Batman, who was leading the league, trying to get more authority from him, but was always briskly denied by the Bat. And one day, Guy decided he had had enough of Bruce's leadership. Guy thought he should lead the league and challenge Batman to a fight to prove himself. He swore he could take on Batman in hand-to-hand combat without the power of his ring. This resulted in what is commonly referred to as the one-punch event. Batman took Guy Gardner down with one swift punch to the face, causing Blue Beetle to exclaim, "One punch! One punch!" Ever since that day, and obviously even before that, the two have never gotten along. Number 6. Bishop and Cable. These two have worked alongside one another before, but the events of the Messiah Complex changed their relationship entirely. The first baby since the events of House of M with the X gene is born, and the race is on for all the groups to try and steal it. Two players in this strange game of Pass the Mutant Baby are Bishop and Cyclops. The two of them have different beliefs as to what should be done with the baby. Bishop wants to kill her, as in his future she grows up to be the one who kills thousands of people, which causes the mutant concentration camps to exist. Cable wants to save her, as in his future she unites all of man and mutant kind. The two beliefs on what the mutant messiah represents dramatically divide the two mutants from different futures. In the end, Cable ends up with her and takes her to the future. He names her Hope after his deceased wife, and she grows up to become mutant Hope Summers. No baby for you, Bishop. No baby for you. Number 5. Miss Marvel and Rogue. These two have been on better terms with one another lately, but their hatred was fairly long lasting. It was also mostly one-sided. I find a good amount of hate in the comics between the heroes actually is one-sided. It's like someone wants to apologize and the other person just doesn't want to hear it. Rogue basically touched Carol Danvers for too long and ended up draining or absorbing more of her powers than she had intended. She also ended up taking Carol's memories in the process, leaving her a shell of her former self. Miss Marvel went to the X-Men, and more specifically Professor Xavier, for help, and they took her in and did their best to help her in recovery. This is actually where Rogue gets her constant ability to fly. Rogue eventually reformed and joined up with the X-Men. She had stolen Carol's powers during her time with the Brotherhood, and she actually felt bad about what she had done, but also she felt somewhat annoyed as she had to live with a piece of Carol constantly inside her mind. The two women have since made up, with Carol offering forgiveness to Rogue after saving her. Though Rogue did try to absorb Carol's powers again in Avengers vs. X-Men, which did not land well with Carol, but then she became Captain Marvel, and now she's over it. She's got her own stuff going on. Now everyone hates her anyways. Number 4. Damian Wayne and Tim Drake. Two Robins that have had a hard time getting along with others. Ergo, it is unsurprising that they both have a hard time getting along with one another. In Tim Drake's defense, he did try to befriend Damian when they first met, only to have Damian try to kill him. Needless to say, from there, Tim was riding that hate train pretty hard, even going so far as to attack Damian when he first shows back up at the manor, announcing that Ra's al Ghul has returned and is after him. Neither one trusts the other. Damian thinks Tim is unworthy and does not deserve to fight alongside his father, as he is not his rightful son. Tim just thinks Damian is a crazed assassin. And well, I mean, he sort of is. Number 3. Captain Marvel and She-Hulk. After the events of Civil War II, a lot of people were feeling some pretty strong hatred towards Captain Marvel. Where Iron Man was painted as the bad guy in the first Civil War between him and Cap, Captain Marvel had now stepped into being the bad guy in Civil War II, going up against Iron Man. While Iron Man obviously had some beef with Captain Marvel coming out of the event after he awoke from, the coma that she put him in, the two had been close before, so eventually they worked towards patching things up. She-Hulk had missed almost the entire event of Civil War II, except for the one event that instigated the divide. In that fight, however, she was knocked into a coma. When she awoke, she discovered that her cousin Bruce Banner, the Hulk, had been killed. Jennifer was shattered and ended up turning gray as a result. She primarily blamed Captain Marvel for this, as the one who believed in using Inhuman Ulysses' visions. Hawkeye believed that Bruce was about to transform into Hulk and unleash mass death and destruction, and mercifully killed him with an arrow to the head. Jennifer was fighting alongside Danvers before the events of Civil War, but the death of her cousin shattered their friendship. Number 2. Old Man Logan and Old Man Hulk. In the dystopian world of Old Man Logan's story, Bruce has pretty much lost his mind. He and his inbred brood of children and grandchildren are the Hulk gang. Banner's children were sired by him and his cousin, She-Hulk, apparently. Ew. The Hulk gang are the landlords of the town that Wolverine lives in with his partner and their children. Bruce is no longer the gentle giant he once strived to be. The gamma radiation has seemingly driven him mad. He and his brood demand payment from old man Logan. Logan agrees to help Hawkeye with a job in order to get the funds he needs for rent. Unfortunately, when he arrives back in town with the funds, he finds out he is too late. The Hulks got bored apparently and came over and killed his family. Logan then takes the fight to Banner, who when transformed is stronger than he's ever been. He devours Logan, but Logan gets him back in the end, regenerating within Hulk's stomach and then cutting his way out, killing Banner and avenging his family's death. Number 1. Black Widow and Hawkeye. Okay, so we have to go to an alternate universe for this one, but it still happened. The ultimate universe is where we're going, of course. In that universe, almost everyone hates Black Widow after she turns out to be a traitor. She and Iron Man are about to get married when she turns on him and kills Jarvis. She was the one behind the death of Hawkeye's family as well and the kidnapping of Hawkeye. Fortunately, Tony Stark had just gifted her a suit of armor, which meant she had nanite implants, and unfortunately for Natasha, Tony had control of those implants, so he was able to knock her out and have her captured pretty much immediately. While Natasha was in the hospital, Hawkeye had escaped his captors and he came straight for her. He shot arrows through her hands and pinned her to the wall before putting an arrow right in her skull. No one messes with Hawkeye's family, and you definitely do not want to be on his hate list. Number 10. All the Robins. There's definitely a level of hate between all Robins due to the competitive edge. They're all working hard to impress Batman, and because of that, they all get competitive with each other, like a bunch of siblings vying for parental attention. It often quickly becomes about who is the best Robin, even when they are working together. The Robin War comic series has many moments of this, especially between Damian and all of the other Robins, as to be expected. Of course, this is also exacerbated for Damian by the fact that they are also dealing with a literal group of copycats who aspire to be like some version of Robin as well. And Teen Titans Go episode, Best Robin, highlights just how easy it is for the Bat family to devolve into petty feuds, like any family. You can't have family love without a bit of family hate. Number 9. Catwoman and Black Canary. Despite these two both being members of the Birds of Prey in the Batman animated series, these two don't always see eye to eye. A lot of the interactions in comics involve them making snide remarks at one another. And in 2008, they actually fought, although the hate between them was fairly short-lived. It was still fairly humorous and real, as the two faced fighting for their own existence and the existence of the animals that they share their names with. In the Catwoman / Tweety and Sylvester crossover, Selena is fighting for the existence of all cats, while Dinah fights for the existence of all birds. The two battle across the city and are forced to recruit other team members to help them out. This also allows us to see fellow Teen Titans Starfire and Raven duke it out, as Starfire is descended from cats apparently, while Raven is obviously representing birds, I suppose due to her name. Catwoman even calls Amanda Waller for backup. It's a pretty funny comic, you should read it. Number 8. Wolverine and SpiderMan. These two just seem to be polar opposites when it comes to their philosophy and attitude on life and crime fighting. Whenever the two are forced to team up, it usually ends in torture for one or both of them. Whether they are swapping bodies or getting sent back in time and forced to live with cavemen and dinosaurs, the two always struggle to see eye to eye and detest one another as a result. In Spider-Man vs. Wolverine out of the 80s, we even saw the two come to blows over their different philosophies. Wolverine was trying to help a friend who wanted to die by giving them a mercy killing, but was stopped from finishing the job by Spider-Man, who had come across the two and couldn't stand by, not understanding why Wolverine would kill his friend. The two fight and Spider-Man accidentally punches the very woman he was trying to save when she uses his spidey senses against him, sneaking up on him and causing him to punch her to death. Oh, comics. The only place where someone get one punch to death. Wolverine to the stomach and then one punch from Spider-Man, yeah, out. Number 7. Emma Frost and Professor X. Emma goes into Professor X's mind to make sure there is no trace of Mr. Sinister and no influence over Charles. In X-Men Legacy, Emma goes into Professor X's mind to make sure there is no trace of Mr. Sinister and no influence over Charles. She does this for Scott as it is not a task she looks forward to. Charles doesn't even think she can manage it. Ooh, harsh. And yet, she does manage it, searching through Charles' memories and somewhat torturing him. She says she doesn't enjoy it, but she explicitly judges Charles while she does so, analyzing the way that they both see reality. The way Emma sees it, she's more of a grounded person, whereas Charles almost sees himself as more of a god or a guardian angel when it comes to the mutants he teaches. At least that's how Emma sees his perception of self. Although Cyclops often praises Emma as a teacher, to her she is actually only ever training students, and this divide between Emma and Charles causes the two to get in a pretty large fight while she is inside his mind. And although the two mutants can often remain civilized and respect one another, there is definitely some hatred bubbling under the surface, and it comes up in this comic, especially coming from Emma, as she doesn't really agree with Charles's treatment of Scott, the way that he raised him. You know what I mean. Number 6. Reed Richards and Namor. These two hate each other because of love. They both have feelings for Sue Storm, and although Reed Richards is actually married to her, Namor constantly feels like Richards does a terrible job of being a good partner, which for the most part is kind of true. But Sue loves Reed and won't leave him. Why? Well, we'll never really know that. Reed is definitely brilliant, but his brilliance often leads him into neglecting his wife and his family life. Namor describes their relationship best when he says, "You met her, you dated her a short time, then you accidentally gave her powers that forced her into your tower. That tower is a cage, created by you for her, but she has come to terms with it. She still loves you." The two can constantly be seen in the comics insulting one another and occasionally even fighting over Sue. Fighting over those ladies. Number 5. Misty Knight and Jessica Jones. Misty has never thought that Jessica was good enough for her friend Luke, and Jessica has never liked that Misty seems to dislike her for no good reason. As such, whenever these two are in a room together, things are bound to get pretty ugly. Even as early as the first issue of Jessica Jones Volume 1 Issue 1 from 2016, one of the first few pages actually shows Misty paying Jessica a visit after she has just got out of prison. The two immediately get in a fight, as Misty has obviously been sent by Luke to retrieve or check up on Luke and Jessica's daughter. Misty says that she has never liked Jessica on a subatomic level, and that she feels she has finally been proven right. The fight ends with Jessica dragging Misty out of her office. It's lucky Jessica didn't throw her through something, jeez, poor Misty. Miss Martian and Martian Manhunter. Miss Martian actually ends up killing Martian Manhunter. Okay, so no, not that Martian Manhunter. This version of Martian Manhunter is actually Miss Martian, but from 9 years in the future. The Teen Titans of the future have returned to the past to preserve the future they came from. The version of Miss Martian that returns has now adopted the mantle of Martian Manhunter, and wears the color of her true race with pride, choosing to appear white rather than green. Miss Martian isn't sure if she can trust her future self, but becomes intrigued with her when she notices her immunity to fire. When her future self prevents her from saving Robin, and her fire immunity is revealed to come not from her power as a white Martian, but from her future armor technology of some kind, she turns on this version of Martian Manhunter. Her future self berates Miss Martian's mind with visions of the future she has come from, filled with graphic images of violence, causing Miss Martian to snap and decapitate her future self. Woo! You know it's hate when it ends with decapitation. That's the border right there. Iron Man and Iron Man. I'm so sorry, but yes, we're going to the crossing for this one. In this Marvel event, it was revealed that Tony Stark was brainwashed by King a long time ago and was actually evil. Why he helped defeat King so many times? Well, that never really made any sense or was explained. Just get ready to put logic on hold for this Marvel event. In order to defeat Iron Man, the Avengers came up with a brilliant idea of snagging his teen self from the past and putting him up against the current Iron Man. That actually only made evil Tony Stark more mad, unfortunately. He whooped his teen self's butt, and when he saw that arrogance in his younger self's eyes, he abhorred it, and he almost killed him. Tony said that his arrogance was what had led him down the path that he was at now, and even though he was evil now, he apparently had some self-loathing issues. Also, that one panel of young him being so happy to have older him dead, but then he feels remorse later, so it's fine. He cries later, he mourns himself. Number 2. Batman and Spawn. Batman runs into Spawn at kind of a bad time during their crossover comic. Spawn was in the process of sending some bad guys to hell, but to Batman, who was not privy to their misdeeds, it looked kinda like murder. His hatred of Spawn comes from the fact that he thinks he is undisciplined and a murderer, whereas Spawn's hatred of the Bat comes from the fact that he thinks he's kind of just a whiny rich kid who is also also just a mortal. Even when the two come together to face the big bad in the comic, they still part on bad terms. Spawn asks Batman if they can bury the hatchet after their team up, and Batman answers by burying a batarang right in the middle of Spawn's face. I guess that's a no. Number 1. Iron Man and Black Widow. Going to the Ultimates universe again for this one. As I said in my previous video when I was talking about the Ultimates Black Widow, no one really likes her. And classifying her as a hero is, not really accurate, as she does turn out to be a traitor, but before that reveal we all actually thought that she was a hero. So I'm gonna count it. In the Ultimates, Tony Stark and Natasha Romanoff become an item. The two even get engaged and plan to get married, which shocked a lot of people. But even more shocking was when it turned out that Natasha was betraying her friends, the Avengers and Tony. While the Liberators are invading, Natasha distracts Tony in the bedroom. But when he can hear the explosions from there, he insists they see what's going on and help out their friends. It's then that Natasha pulls a gun on him and reveals her true colors. Just then, Jarvis enters with breakfast and Black Widow shoots him in the head. Oh, Jarvis! Tony had gifted her her own Iron Man suit for their wedding, but fortunately he still controls the nanites within her body that allow her to control the suit, and he uses his control over them to disable Black Widow, announcing that 5,000 failed relationships can make a man a little cynical. Yeah, that's a lot of failed relationships, so that makes sense. Number 10. Hulk and Thor. Hulk and Thor recently clashed in Donny Cates' crossover story between their two series, both of which he is currently penning. The story that he wrote with them duking it out is entitled Banner War. However, these two also have a long history of having beef in the comics, albeit pretty playful beef I'd say. Their feud is similar in nature to that of Hulk's feud with the Thing. The question starting it all being who is really strongest between them. Thor likewise enjoys the challenge of taking on Hulk, and the two are seen as being pretty evenly matched. Though at the end of the day, I would actually still say that Hulk is stronger, as Hulk is known for being the strongest there is after all. And friends, before we move on to our next spot on this list, if you love what we do here at Top 10 Nerd, be sure to show us that you love us by clicking that like button. Number 9. Martian Manhunter and Green Lantern. Martian Manhunter was there when John Stewart's Green Lantern let an entire planet be destroyed as a result of his ego. The two were deployed to the planet in the hopes of saving it, but Green Lantern didn't feel that he actually needed Martian Manhunter's help and restrained him. Unfortunately, this proved to be a mistake, as when John found the on the planet, it and the room that it was contained in was painted entirely yellow, preventing John from using his Green Lantern powers to do anything to destroy or defuse it. Yikes. As a result, the planet was destroyed, with only John and John surviving the explosion, leaving Martian Manhunter grossly disappointed in his colleague Green Lantern and his hubris. Number 8. Captain Marvel and Iron Man. This is a pretty ridiculous one considering how close these two were, but hey, Civil War II happened. It happened and we gotta acknowledge it. We can't ignore that. Carol and Tony used to be the best of friends, with Tony even using the nickname of Care Bear for Carol, a nickname that her BFF Jessica Drew aka Spider-Woman also often uses, so you know that means that they're pretty close. However, this didn't stop them from getting into it when Carol believed the best way to deal with crime was by fighting criminals before they even manifested as such. That was what Civil War II was basically all about. Basically, it was Minority Report. Captain Marvel believed that using the Inhuman Ulysses' visions to prevent crime was the best course of action, whereas Tony, oddly enough the voice of reason here, believed the best way to go about things was actually to wait until an actual crime happened, not trust in, as he saw it, unreliable visions. Enter Civil War II, which ended with Carol as pretty much a straight up unreasonable villain in the eyes of readers who punched Tony into a coma. Number 7. Robin and Robin. When it comes to the Bat family, there are quite a few feuds to be had, unsurprisingly. I mean, hey, it's a big family. Still, I think one of the most dramatic was the one between Tim Drake and Damian Wayne. Initially, when these two met, they seemingly got off on the wrong foot, and Tim kinda wanted to try to offer an olive branch. This came in the form of offering to spar with young Damian, with Tim promising to take it easy on him. However, everything quickly went awry when Damian revealed that earlier in the night he'd actually killed a criminal, the Spook, taking his head. The two ended up fighting, and Damian knocks out Robin's Tim Drake, leaving him bleeding on the floor of the Batcave, and donning a version of his costume when he goes to confront his father, letting him know that he is ready to replace Tim as Robin. Batman ends up returning and retrieving Tim, helping to fix up the damage that Damian did to him. Eventually, these two would move past this feud, but for a while there, it was basically life-threatening. Number 6. Daredevil and Punisher. Daredevil and the Punisher are usually seen to be friends and allies, but because of their difference in opinions when it comes to how best to handle superheroic issues, they are sometimes known known to be rivals of one another as well. This element of their relationship is especially highlighted in the Netflix Daredevil series, where we are first introduced to this world's live-action representation of the Punisher. Here, Matt Murdock disagrees with Punisher's tactics, believing he should not kill his enemies or people who get in his way of tracking down his true enemies, whereas the Punisher believes the people he kills deserve it. Although both see the other as a hero of sorts, there are times when they look down on one another or condemn them for their methods. In fact, Frank Castle has likely thought before that Daredevil is not harsh enough when it comes to the way that he doles out justice. Number 5. Zatana and Catwoman. Oh boy, does Catwoman have reason to have beef with Zatana. These two ended up in a fight with one another after it was revealed that Catwoman may have only become a full-fledged hero as a result of Zatana manipulating her mind. Because of this revelation, Catwoman turned on Zatana, with the two getting into a physical fight. In the end, Selina was rightly pissed at Z after learning this, feeling like she had never in her life been more violated than she was when Zatana changed her against her will. It also made Catwoman question whether or not she was actually the hero she had become at this point, since she'd obviously had no choice in that matter. What a terrible thing to do to someone. Number 4. Jean Grey and Emma Frost. A feud that feels as old as time, really, or at least almost as old as Emma Frost's character. Initially, this feud started because Emma was a villain in the comics, being the White Queen of the Hellfire Club. This made her a rival to not just Jean, but also all of the X-Men. Emma was actually introduced around the time of the Dark Phoenix saga too, and was one of those present and involved when Mastermind took Jean and brainwashed her into joining the Hellfire Club as its Black Queen. Of course, this wasn't really Jean, but the Phoenix, who had taken on Jean's likeness, both in personality and in appearance. What really caused these two women to dislike one another though took place when Emma had reformed and become a hero, and that happened mainly as a result of Emma having a psychic affair with Jean's husband, Scott Summers, aka Cyclops, during a time when their marriage was strained. Hence the feud. Number 3. Superman and Shazam. One of the most iconic feuds in comics isn't necessarily a real narrative feud. I mean, these two don't typically go after one another to fight needlessly in terms of themselves as characters. They don't really have much of a reason to be jealous of the other or even dislike the other, but they do end up pitted against each other, often in alternate realities, and just because people like to see who would win if they got in a fight. And actually, their feud extends back in history to like the creation of these characters, which were considered rivals in terms of them being with two different publishers at the time in comics. In most cases, because these two are so evenly matched, generally their fights end in either a standstill, a stalemate, or with Superman implied as the victor. While Superman might be weak to Shazam's magic, Shazam is often forced to transform back into Billy by Superman's tactics. So, number 2. X-Men and the Eternals. Though not all X-Men and not all Eternals are involved in this one. This feud is actually what sets up the Avengers vs. X-Men vs. Eternals Judgment Day event. It all goes down because of the reveal to the world that mutants have the power to resurrect themselves, which is happening now in modern comics, essentially meaning that mutants have become immortal beings. Druig, who at the time is Prime Eternal, thinks this makes mutants far too powerful and labels them as deviants, which obviously deviants are the people that the Eternals must always fight against, which apparently isn't that much of a stretch either, because genetic-wise, mutants are similar enough to deviants for the deviants to successfully be able to use the gates on Krakoa. Labeling them as deviants means the Eternals go to war with the mutants, and of course, their premier superhero team, the X-Men. Hence, X-Men and Eternals fighting each other. Number 1. Green Lantern and Batman. At this point, Batman pretty much has beef with, well, almost any Green Lantern you can think of. At least most of the Green Lanterns who are Earth-based, I would say. The most famous feud between Batman and Green Lantern, though, is the one between Bruce and Guy Gardner. Guy Gardner is basically the epitome of everything that kinda irks Batman in regards to a fellow hero's attitude. He's brash, bold, grating, and often seen as undisciplined. At least, you know, in comparison to someone as regimented as Batman, I would say. When Guy found himself in the Justice League and under Batman's leadership, the two clashed to the point that Guy actually decided to challenge Batman, hoping to replace the Dark Knight as the new leader of the team. Well, this didn't end very well for Guy, who was knocked out famously in one punch by Batman. Although it should be noted that this was Guy fighting without the power of the Green Lantern, as he egotistically chose to take off his power ring and not fight with it. So yeah, which is pretty Guy Gardner, I gotta say.
Number 10. Spider-Man and the Human Torch. In one of his earliest adventures, Avengers, Spider-Man broke into the Baxter Building in an attempt to impress the Fantastic Four, in hopes of being invited to join the team. This led to a misunderstanding and a conflict between Spider-Man and the team. Although this encounter left both sides with a bad taste in their mouths, it was Peter and Johnny who had the most tension between them due to Johnny's need to be seen as tough and manly, and Peter being reminded of the popular kids who used to pick on him, like Flash Thompson. The Fantastic Four eventually came around to the webbed wall crawler, and Spidey and the Torch became close friends, even referring to each other as brothers. But a friendly rivalry remained between the two. This is perhaps best memorialized in Amazing Spider-Man number 657, when we got a glimpse of a camping trip taken by the Fantastic Four and Spider-Man. The two began an elaborate and ever-escalating prank war, with some highlights being Human Torch heating up a bowl of water to try and get a sleeping Spider-Man to wet himself, Spider-Man covering the toilet paper with webbing, Johnny using sunscreen and his powers to write the words "Flame on" Spidey's back, and Peter creating a fake shark fin out of webbing to scare the Human Torch when he was swimming. The two put a pause to their prank war in order to team up to play an elaborate trick on the Thing, so while the two heroes have nothing but love and respect for each other, their friendly rivalry seems to bring nothing but joy to each of them, which is a nice change from all the other entries on this list who seem to genuinely hate each other.
Do Andrew and I have a friendly rivalry, or do we have a rivalry where we hate each other?
I hate you.
I only have the utmost respect for Andrew, so we'll have to resolve this at another time. Also, a quick reminder, if you like this video, you should do the things that people do when they like stuff, like click like or subscribe. Number 9, Moonstone and Miss Marvel. Speaking of rivalries where people hate each other, I also know a lot of people might not know who Moonstone is, and might say, Amanda, there are bigger rivalries than this one that you could be covering right now. And hey, I hear you. But while this list is about biggest rivalries, I also like to keep things fresh by touching on characters and relationships in lists like this that we don't often get to talk about. One, because it helps me to stay sane by not telling you about the same stuff on repeat because, you know, been here for a while, guys. And 2, it's just fun to learn new things. I love learning new things, and I hope you do too. So for those of you who don't know, Moonstone was a member of the Thunderbolts and is Karla Sofin. From day one, she was pretty much a straight up villain. Even when she was a psychiatrist before she got her powers, she was a pretty mean and awful psychiatrist, to be honest. At one point, she becomes the Dark Avengers version of Miss Marvel, standing in for Carol Danvers, who refused to join up with Norman Osborn's team, understandably, and who at the time was known as Miss Marvel. This was before Carol took up the mantle of her former mentor, Mar-Vell, and became Captain Marvel. As a result, the two ended up becoming adversaries, and after Carol dies and is resurrected, Karla fights her for the title of Miss Marvel. She kinda loses this fight, but in a weird twist, she also finds herself again during it, becoming Moonstone once more, with Carol also becoming whole again as a result. Also, for those who are wondering, this is who Carol was fighting in the thumbnail / the cover photo, if you would prefer, for our part 1 to this list, which you should definitely check out if you haven't done that already.
I don't actually hate Amanda. I just hate that she's clearly more popular than me.
What?
Number 8, Northstar and Guardian. I know, I have an Alpha Flight problem, just deal with it. Compared to other Marvel teams like the Avengers or certainly the X-Men, Canada's super team, Alpha Flight, has been relatively free from interpersonal conflict. Part of this is because of how the team is divided up across the country and rarely actually have to team up with everyone, and partly because Canadians are so polite that rivalries are much harder to spot. However, 2 teammates who have never gotten along are Jean-Paul Beaubier and James McDonald Hudson. Hudson thinks of Jean-Paul as an arrogant, petulant jerk, and Jean-Paul thinks of Hudson as a manipulative government stooge. Both characters have relatively valid points, and as someone who wants Quebec to be its own separate nation, it makes sense that Northstar would have an issue with the guy dressed in the Canadian flag. But what is the source of this rivalry? Before the formation of Alpha Flight, Northstar believed himself to be an only child, but when Hudson began searching Canada for potential members of his super team, he discovered both Northstar and his long-lost twin sister, Jean-Marie. He introduced the two and made both of them members of Alpha Flight, giving them the opportunity to get to know each other while serving as team members. You'd think that would make Northstar relatively grateful, but when they discovered that Jean-Marie was actually mentally unstable, suffering from dissociative identity disorder, Northstar wanted her removed from the team for her own well-being. She refused to leave, and Hudson allowed her to stay, making Northstar believe that Hudson was taking advantage of her poor mental health to keep a powerful team member around. The two have had a rocky relationship ever since, with Northstar openly insulting Guardian in the field, and Guardian mostly brushing it off unless it begins to interfere with the mission. Despite their issues, they are capable of supporting each other from time to time, with Northstar reluctantly attending James's funeral the first time he died, and James showing up in uniform to Northstar's wedding in astonishing X-Men number 51.
I'm the Human Torch and you're Spider-Man, and you're mine.
I can live with that.
Oh my gosh. Also guys, show Andrew that he's also popular and give him love in the comments. Number 7. Madam Mask and Hawkeye. No, not that Hawkeye. This Hawkeye. Madam Mask has beef with a few heroes and some kind of weird romances too, but that's for another list. Like her relationship with Iron Man, which is a love affair, but then it can also be adversarial too, since, you know, she's a villain. Anyways, with Kate Bishop's Hawkeye, these two developed beef after Kate attempted to help out Clint Barton's Hawkeye while he was trying to retrieve a tape from a black market auction that showed him assassinating a dictator. Don't worry though, Clint didn't really do this. The tape was actually a fake to help protect the true identity of the agent who completed the mission on S.H.I.E.L.D.'s Black Ops team. Kate ended up impersonating Madam Mask at the auction, wearing her mask and her clothes after incapacitating her, something Madam Mask would not easily forget and would actually swear revenge on her for, hence their rivalry.
At least we can all agree that Adam's the worst of us, right? Number 6. Hulk and the Red Hulk. When Bruce Banner transformed into the Hulk in his first appearance, he stumbled across Betty Ross. The sight of the Hulk caused Betty to faint, and her father, Thaddeus Thunderbolt Ross, vowed to destroy the monster. This has led to one of the longest rivalries in Marvel history, as Ross has used his position as a general to hunt Banner across the world, hoping to either capture or kill him. The fact that Banner managed to defeat other threats such as the Abomination led Ross to eventually develop a grudging respect for him, but the hate never really died down, not even once Bruce married Ross's daughter, making the man his son-in-law. They came to terms briefly, but once Betty was killed, the rivalry fired up again. The rivalry reached new heights when Ross teamed up with villains such as MODOK and the Leader to transform himself into the Red Hulk. After years of stewing hatred, Ross was able to actively fight the Hulk and even defeat him in their first encounter. The Hulk of course eventually bounced back and took out Ross. Ross has bounced around with his allegiances, having been everything from a villain to an Avenger, but whatever side he is on, he never turns down an opportunity to make life difficult for Banner or the Hulk.
Then Adam is the thing, and then we can both prank Adam together. Adam, if you're watching this video, watch out, but you're probably not, so haha, we're gonna get you. Number 5. Miss Marvel and Rogue. Back when Miss Marvel was none other than Carol Danvers, of course. These two women had a long-standing rivalry because of how much Rogue really messed Carol up. Rogue not only stole Carol's powers, but also left her comatose, and upon recovery without much of her memories and emotional connections to her memories. At the same time, this wasn't exactly a walk in the park for Rogue either, who also didn't much care for Carol, as Carol's own memories and psyche basically haunted Rogue as a result of their altercation. For a while, these two really did not like and even hated each other. The good news is Carol would actually have nothing to fear from Rogue now, as Rogue has much better control over her powers and doesn't really need to worry much anymore about accidentally draining someone's memories, life force energy, or even accidentally their powers. Number 4. Wolverine and Cyclops. Even more iconic than any other superhero rivalry involving Wolverine is probably the one between him and Cyclops. Now, you could chalk this one up to the fact that Logan is just hot-tempered at times and stubborn, and therefore he just, doesn't often get along well with others. But really, when it comes to these two, it's actually all about the approach to heroism and breaking rules versus playing by them. Which oddly enough doesn't always mean that each person is always advocating for the same principle between those two, but they generally tend to be on opposite sides regardless. For example, if Wolverine is arguing that breaking the rules is the right play, then Slim is usually arguing against that, and vice versa. At the same time, their rivalry is also quite brotherly at times, and at the end of the day, probably a lot like Cap and Iron Man. These two men respect one another, and despite their infighting, often would consider the other a part of their family. Number 3. Batman and Superman. These two are often thought of as being the best of friends, and well, they are. But that doesn't mean that they don't have fights and that they don't have any beef with each other at any point. In fact, in some realities, the differences between them lead the two to become sworn enemies, as opposed to staying the best of friends. The best thing about these two heroes is in fact how different they both are to one another, and perhaps what has made their rivalry and friendship so strong throughout the years and throughout DC's multiverse is that they both see how much they are different from the other. In some cases, they deeply respect and admire the other's differences. In other cases, it actually leads them to try and break their once fellow colleague, unable to reconcile and accept the other's differences or mindset. Number 2. Iron Man and Captain America. This one feels like a feud as old as time. It's at least as old as these characters are. And in fact, while it does have a long history, it's still relevant today. Captain America and Iron Man clashed during the First Civil War, most iconically, but even recently have been seen at odds with one another following the events of AXE Judgment Day. While Captain America was deemed unworthy by the progenitor, Iron Man's Tony Stark was given a thumbs up instead, leaving the pair to bicker over the judgments and what they truly meant, if anything. During Judgment Day, issue number 6, Tony asked Cap after the event, "Are you okay?" with Cap responding, "No, and we shouldn't feel okay. It was a wake-up call. We should all pay attention and act." Tony clarifies, "No, I don't mean that. I meant me passing and you failing. That must be hard for you." Steve pointedly responds by saying, "You made the Celestial. It was based on you, and it tried to kill the Earth, and you're taking its opinion as meaning anything?" Once again and always, opposite sides. Number 1. Black Panther and Namor. While Iron Man and Captain America may have a more iconic feud in the comics and films, Black Panther and Namor have one that not only is between them, but also extends to their nation. And theirs has actually resulted in all-out war, not just in the superhero community, but in terms of their own countries as well. This feud actually started, as most do in comics, as a misunderstanding. But as a result of that, both of their peoples began to mistakenly attack one another, and Black Panther and Namor basically started to watch out for the other person. Eventually, it got to the point that they can no longer let bygones be bygones and talk it out. In the film Wakanda Forever, we see this feud making its way to the big screen, with tensions rising between Shuri's Black Panther and Namor of the Talokan, as well as, Wakanda and the Talokan. I feel like overall superhero rivalries are something that can be easily leveraged by villains to distract superheroes enough to give them the freedom they need to unleash their devious plots on the world.
At number 10, we have Cyclops vs. Wolverine. In X-Men Schism number 4, a fight breaks out between these two superheroes because of a complex decision on how to face an onslaught of Sentinels unleashed by the world's powers. And as an enormous, seemingly regenerative Sentinel is approaching the two of them, Cyclops insists on allowing the young X-Men to stay and fight, while Wolverine believes it's wrong to put young ones in harm's way. So it's a battle between should we stay and fight or run and regroup. Well, Wolverine gets outranked by Cyclops, but instead of backing down, he goes to their home base and sets 2,000 pounds of explosives to go off at the press of a button to take out the Sentinel and allow for a distraction as they get away. Cyclops is angered by the subordination and decides to take it out on Wolverine as they start to battle it out. And the Sentinel is coming right towards them just to make everything worse. Maybe not the best time to pick an epic fight, guys, but it is a tough call and both arguments make sense to me in different ways. I guess this stuff just sometimes happens. Next on our list at number 9 is The Thing vs. the Hulk. This is a classic showdown that many of you may already be aware of, where Ben Grimm and Bob Banner go at it in the middle of the city streets. Side note, Stan Lee accidentally referred to the Hulk's alter ego as Bob Banner instead of Bruce for a few months before correcting it. Just some trivia for you. Anyway, the reason why they're fighting is basically that the Hulk is going crazy and smashing everything in sight, trying to reach his goal of finding the Avengers to take them down. When the Hulk easily knocks out the Human Torch and holds on to him like a prize at the county fair, the Thing watches by the sidelines wanting to get involved. Then, after Invisible Woman tries to protect the Human Torch with an invisible force screen, she too is rendered unconscious by the Hulk. So the Thing has to take things into his own hands and fight the Hulk himself. The fight goes on for pages and pages, with buildings being knocked down, buses being torn in half. At one point, the Thing drives a boat. It's crazy. Unfortunately, it ends with the crazed Hulk getting the best of Benjamin Grimm, leaving him exhausted both physically and mentally, clambering back to his feet. Alright, at number 8, we've got Superman vs. Shazam. In 1996's Kingdom Come, we witness a fight between these two, initiating at the end of issue 3 and carrying out into issue 4. The reason behind the fight is complicated, but to keep it simple, Shazam has been brainwashed by Lex Luthor, so it's not really him controlling his own actions. But it is a tough thing watching as an aging Superman basically gets beaten up so badly that he almost dies. In this storyline, Superman has the pure intentions of trying to corral a new generation of less than heroic superheroes to help bring peace back to Earth. And with internal resistance on that front, and also these plots by his typical enemies to imprison him, he's really just not ready to defend himself. Not to mention, he's totally caught off guard, and once again, he's older. Luckily, after some serious blows of magical electricity coming from Shazam, Superman is finally able to get through to his alter ego and speak directly to Billy Batson, saving himself, and ultimately a whole lot more from what could have been a game-changing move for Lex Luthor and the others. Unfortunately, there's still a lot of destruction done when Shazam sacrifices himself to detonate an enormous bomb early in the air above the battlefield, saving countless lives. Alright, at number 7, we've got Reed Richards versus Namor. This is a spicy face-off as it's a classic fight of jealousy and competition over a woman's affection. Susan Storm is unconscious in the hospital, and the arrogant and shameless Namor keeps making advances on her right in front of Richard. This escalates to the point where Namor actually makes a move on Susan as she's just barely coming to, and right when Reed enters the room as well. Susan tries to de-escalate the situation, but it's no use due to her injuries and fatigue, so the two heroes go after it. As they rip through the city streets, they throw insults at each other as they tear apart cafes, cars, and the road. It's a pretty fiery battle that Richard seems to know he's at risk of losing due to Namor's sheer strength, but Reed takes the win in the end, exclaiming in a heroic monologue that his anger isn't actually directed at Namor, but at himself for not being a good husband to Susan throughout the years. It's a pretty epic battle with some realistic and possibly relatable motivations, giving it a rightful spot on our list. Coming in at number 6 is Namor again versus Daredevil this time. In this instance, Namor is being arrested as if the human legal system is any match for a superhero, and to represent him, he decides to hire the blind Matt Murdock, aka Daredevil. Basically, Namor is angry because he wants a place on land for his people who have only ever lived under the sea. In fact, he actually wants to sue the entire human race for denying them their birthright, as he calls it. Matt, being the pragmatic lawyer that he is, simply acknowledges that there's just no legal precedent for suing the whole human race. This obvious and very astute point throws Namor the Submariner into a rage that he takes to the streets without using the door. And in this moment is actually when Daredevil first wears the red suit that we all know, and it's in preparation for his fight with Namor, where Daredevil is off to protect humanity from an outraged underwater superhero. So this fight between two superheroes is heated by an external issue that forces them to clash. In so many words, Daredevil's sense of duty is clashing against Namor's rage. They take the fight directly to the streets, busting down lampposts, crumbling brick walls, and even taking over a wrecking ball at one point. The fight ends with Namor winning, naturally, claiming that Daredevil had been the most courageous of all his foes, at least, despite having faced off against the Fantastic Four and the Avengers. And that's a pretty good accolade for Daredevil if I've got to say anything about it.
Okay, number 5, Wolverine and Sabretooth. Where Xavier and Magneto are frenemies, these two are essentially mortal enemies, and they take it to an insanely violent level. Honestly, I feel like a lot of this is just because of Sabretooth. Like, Logan seems like he just wants to live a peaceful life, and Sabretooth just comes out of nowhere, multiple times, to ruin that. It's almost frustrating, but they wouldn't be the same if their rivalry did not exist. They actually started out as friends in the beginning, and then, on orders from another bad guy, Sabretooth brought Logan's girlfriend to an end on Logan's birthday. Then, ever since, this became a tradition, as every single year on Logan's birthday, Victor would hunt him down and fight Logan until he was basically at the pearly gates, just to prove he was better. And these guys have lived for hundreds of years, so imagine that every year on your birthday. That would suck. Number 4, Thor and Loki. Thanks to the MCU making Loki so damn likable, this rivalry became a bit more suppressed in recent years, but this rivalry goes back before pretty much anything else. These guys are literally gods and have been around for essentially thousands of years. It all began with childhood pranks as Thor was exceedingly proud and Loki is the trickster god, but Loki's schemes would become more and more intense and endangering as they grew up. Loki trying to bring Thor into trouble and battle by manipulating the Hulk is the whole reason Thor joined up with the Avengers and the team was formed in the first place. There is also the fact that Loki would be the cause of Ragnarok, the fated apocalyptic event that brings the end of Asgard. You can't really find a rivalry that's outlasted this one, as it is quite literally myth and legend. Number 3, Reed Richards and Dr. Doom. Nothing like a good old college rivalry to keep you sharp and on your toes. If Victor Von Doom and Reed Richards, two of the smartest men in Marvel Comics, had teamed up together or tried to encourage one another, the world would probably be a utopia. Unfortunately, Dr. Doom is one arrogant guy, and he is much more theoretical, famous for using magic and mysticism alongside his genius, whereas Reed is incredibly practical. Reed also seems to not respect boundaries, as in college, he read his rival's research on trying to save his own mother and then proceeded to tell Doom all the ways it wouldn't work. Doom's arrogance led him to dismiss Reed, and then it turned out Reed was right, which led directly to the scarring of Doom's face. This was before they had even become their super selves. Their rivalry comes almost entirely down to the fact that Doom will never admit that Reed is smarter than him. Doom is petty, but we love him for it. Number 2, Captain America and Red Skull. What's interesting about this one is that there probably wouldn't even be a Captain America without the Red Skull's existence. If it weren't for Johann Schmidt's activities on the Axis side of power during Marvel's World War II, then the plan for a super soldier serum to combat him may not have even appeared. Stopping the Red Skull was one of Steve Rogers' first assignments, and his whole Captain America persona was created in stark contrast to the Red Skull, who had become an icon for his side of the war. As such, the rivalry between these two characters is one of the longest running ones in Marvel's history, other than Thor and Loki. Even after Captain America was frozen on ice for decades and came back to the world, Skull found a way to follow him. The Skull even finds ways to come back from the afterlife just to keep on fighting Captain America. And in at number 1, Peter Parker and the Green Goblin. The answer to who Spider-Man's main rival isn't really clear-cut as someone like Captain America or Thor. It's usually a bit of a tie between Dr. Otto Octavius and Norman Osborn. But if we are being honest with each other here, the personal connections and personal attacks that belong to Green Goblin have absolutely made a bigger splash in Peter's life, both personally and as a hero. Gobby orchestrated the Clone Saga, one of the most infamous Spider-Man stories that saw the hero completely doubt who he was. And he did it all from the shadows after taking the life of Gwen Stacy and coming back from his own demise. He returned from the afterlife, and his main goal was to still mess with Spider-Man. Doc Ock has succeeded in actually defeating Spider-Man, but Norman makes his life as miserable as he can because he can strike at Peter personally. Today, Norman has made a change to become a hero as the Gold Goblin, but in the very first issue, you get the vibe that that won't actually last.
Number 10, Hulk and Thor. Hulk and Thor recently clashed in Donny Cates' crossover story between their two series, both of which he is currently penning. The story that he wrote with them duking it out is entitled Banner War. However, these two also have a long history of having beef in the comics, albeit pretty playful beef, I'd say. Their feud is similar in nature to that of Hulk's feud with the Thing. The question starting it all being who is really strongest between them. Thor likewise enjoys the challenge of taking on Hulk, and the two are seen as being pretty evenly matched. Though at the end of the day, I would actually still say that Hulk is stronger, as Hulk is known for being the strongest there is after all. And friends, before we move on to our next spot on this list, if you love what we do here at Top 10 Nerd, be sure to show us that you love us by clicking that like button. Number 9, Martian Manhunter and Green Lantern. Martian Manhunter was there when John Stewart's Green Lantern let an entire planet be destroyed as a result of his ego. The two were deployed to the planet in the hopes of saving it, but Green Lantern didn't feel that he actually needed Martian Manhunter's help and restrained him. Unfortunately, this proved to be a mistake, as when John found the on the planet, it and the room that it was contained in was painted entirely yellow, preventing John from using his Green Lantern powers to do anything to destroy or defuse it. Yikes. As a result, the planet was destroyed, with only John and John surviving the explosion, leaving Martian Manhunter grossly disappointed in his colleague Green Lantern and his hubris. Number 8, Captain Marvel and Iron Man. This is a pretty ridiculous one considering how close these two were, but hey, Civil War II happened. It happened and we gotta acknowledge it. We can't ignore that. Carol and Tony used to be the best of friends, with Tony even using the nickname of Care Bear for Carol, a nickname that her BFF Jessica Drew aka Spider-Woman also often uses, so you know that means that they're pretty close. However, this didn't stop them from getting into it when Carol believed the best way to deal with crime was by fighting criminals before they even manifested as such. That was what Civil War II was basically all about. Basically, it was Minority Report. Captain Marvel believed that using the Inhuman Ulysses' visions to prevent crime was the best course of action, whereas Tony, oddly enough the voice of reason here, believed the best way to go about things was actually to wait until an actual crime happened, not trust in, as he saw it, unreliable visions. Enter Civil War II, which ended with Carol as pretty much a straight up unreasonable villain in the eyes of readers who punched Tony into a coma. Number 7, Robin and Robin. When it comes to the Bat family, there are quite a few feuds to be had, unsurprisingly. I mean, hey, it's a big family. Still, I think one of the most dramatic was the one between Tim Drake and Damian Wayne. Initially, when these two met, they seemingly got off on the wrong foot, and Tim kinda wanted to try to offer an olive branch. This came in the form of offering to spar with young Damian, with Tim promising to take it easy on him. However, everything quickly went awry when Damian revealed that earlier in the night he'd actually killed a criminal, the Spook, taking his head. The two ended up fighting, and Damian knocks out Robin's Tim Drake, leaving him bleeding on the floor of the Batcave, and donning a version of his costume when he goes to confront his father, letting him know that he is ready to replace Tim as Robin. Batman ends up returning and retrieving Tim, helping to fix up the damage that Damian did to him. Eventually, these two would move past this feud, but for a while there, it was basically life-threatening. Number 6. Daredevil and Punisher. Daredevil and the Punisher are usually seen to be friends and allies, but because of their difference in opinions when it comes to how best to handle superheroic issues, they are sometimes known to be rivals of one another as well. This element of their relationship is especially highlighted in the Netflix Daredevil series, where we are first introduced to this world's live-action representation of the Punisher. Here, Matt Murdock disagrees with Punisher's tactics, believing he should not kill his enemies or people who get in his way of tracking down his true enemies, whereas the Punisher believes the people he kills deserve it. Although both see the other as a hero of sorts, there are times when they look down on one another or condemn them for their methods. In fact, Frank Castle has likely thought before that Daredevil is not harsh enough when it comes to the way that he doles out justice.
Number 5. The Punisher versus Wolverine and SpiderMan and Daredevil. Now you might expect you know how this one should go, but let's also remember that this is Garth Ennis writing Punisher, so yeah. It doesn't really go down the way you'd think. Instead, the Punisher manipulates the three heroes briefly into turning against one another when they seek to bring him in. These three are hoping to team up to essentially arrest Punisher and then turn him over to the courts and, you know, get him convicted with like the law and all of that stuff, even though Wolverine needs a bit of convincing when it comes to this approach at the beginning. Punisher takes out all three of these heroes, even managing to disable Spider-Man by convincing him that if he moves, bombs will go off. You'd think Spider-Man would actually be able to sense whether or not this was true, but I digress. I guess his spidey sense wasn't working that well that day. Number 4. Superman versus Batman. I mean, you'd think you know how this one should shake out, considering Batman is just a normal human with a bunch of money and, well, years of training. However, in Dark Knight Returns, we get to be pleasantly surprised. A normal man, even when as skilled as Bruce Wayne, you'd think would just be no match for Superman, especially as, well, he's getting on in years here, whereas Kal-El, while also being older, barely looks or seems to have aged at all. But Batman uses all of his strategic skills, knowledge, and his gadgets to help him win this fight. And man, does it go to show that you should never dismiss Batman just because he doesn't have conventional superpowers. Or superpowers at all. Batman has the best superpower, the superpower to know a ton about heroes because he does his homework. Number 3, The Punisher versus Sentry. During Dark Reign, Punisher refuses to stand by and let Norman Osborn become the world's new biggest and brightest hero, as S.H.I.E.L.D. is disbanded and Osborn becomes the head of its replacement organization, Hammer, and the new Dark Avengers team. Punisher aims to eliminate Norman Osborn, but standing in his way is the Sentry, who stops the Punisher's bullet mid-air as it soars towards Osborn's head. Sentry sets his sights on Frank, and, well, I think you can imagine how this one goes. Still, at least this fight is gratifying in the sense that it isn't over with like a 1-2 punch. Instead, we actually watch as the Punisher tries everything he can to try to defeat Sentry, knowing it's pretty much all hopeless, but refusing to give up. And he does all this while being brutalized by Robert, who initially just wants to talk it out and arrest Punisher without a fuss. So that's how Punisher is actually able to survive, because Sentry just wants to talk. Punisher's skills and weapons aren't what save him actually at the end of the day. He simply manages to get lucky when Robert doesn't call out his get out of jail attempt at bluffing. Thank goodness. Number 2, Superman versus Alfred Pennyworth. You would think you already know how this fight would shake out, but hey, it didn't go down quite the way most of us would expect when it happened in Injustice. After Superman broke Batman's back with the good old Bane snap over the knee move, he had a brief moment of regret as Batman called him out for being more monster than hero, for torturing him, all while claiming it was for the greater good. As Superman considers what he's just done, he turns to Alfred, who has approached him. However, Alfred didn't approach Superman to, communicate any words of wisdom here or to help Clark come back around and regain his senses and see the error of his ways. He came to teach Superman a lesson about attacking Bruce. Alfred used a pill which temporarily granted him the same level of strength as Superman, making this super uneven fight on paper a lot more even. In reality, using the element of surprise, Alfred was then able to beat Superman to a pulp while confessing that he was very disappointed at him before scooping up Bruce and taking him to safety. Reminding everyone that even when it comes to facing powerful foes like Superman, Alfred is still and will always be a badass. In case people forgot. Number 1, Squirrel Girl versus Galactus. I freaking love this fight, and I love that I started this list with Squirrel Girl and I'm ending it with her, even though this fight is super ridiculous. You wouldn't think someone like Squirrel Girl, whose powers include communicating with and controlling squirrels and sharp teeth, would be able to take on and even defeat the epic force of Galactus, who is nigh unstoppable and comes armed with the Power Cosmic, which basically allows you to do, whatever writers need whoever wields it to do. Power Cosmic, by the way, turns out does help Galactus to communicate in the vacuum of space as well. In the Unbeatable Squirrel Girl issue 4, Squirrel Girl defeats Galactus by realizing that the only way to defeat him is by offering him an alternate planet to devour other than Earth. She and Tippy Toe manage to access the databases in his ship's computers and find one that is covered in nuts, which they manage to convince Galactus are delicious and nutritious, full of calories, life energy. As strange as this all sounds, the whole issue is pretty great when it comes to writing, so as weird as it sounds that Squirrel Girl was able to beat Galactus, it actually really makes sense in this context.
Number 10, Batman and Green Lantern. Guy isn't the only person who has a problem with Batman, and vice versa. Many Green Lanterns seem to rub the Dark Knight the wrong way. I think it's because he doesn't trust the amount of power they are given, and perhaps the process in which, they're chosen. Batman has also been shown to have disagreements with Hal Jordan's Green Lantern in the past, and demonstrate a lack of trust in him, despite his accolades. Although, I guess with Hal's track record, that's kind of fair. In the world of Frank Miller's All-Star Batman and Robin, Batman even straight up attacks Hal when he criticizes Batman, exploiting his, at the time, weakness to the color yellow. And friends, before we move on to our next spot on this list, if you love what we do here at Top 10 Nerd, and if you love big superhero rivalries, be sure to let us know by giving this video a thumbs up. Number 9, Deadpool and Wolverine. Another classic feud is one between Deadpool and Wolverine. I love this one. This pretty much has to do with Wolverine being one of the most serious guys around, and Wade being pretty much a complete goof all the time, who sometimes also just happens to be not very good at what he does. Whereas by contrast, Wolverine is very good at what he does. Although what both of these two anti-hero-ish characters often do isn't very nice. Deadpool and Wolverine have been forced to team up on a few occasions, and it's always fun to watch them do so because, they're both so different. And yet in some ways, they're also kind of similar, even though I feel like Wolverine would not admit that. Last time I saw them team up in the comics was in X-Force, where Deadpool ended up mainly acting as comic relief, despite his intentions to prove himself to the rest of the team and prove that he deserved his place among them. Number 8, Human Torch and the Thing. Talk about some brotherly love and also some brotherly chaos. This is exactly what Human Torch, aka Johnny Storm, and the Thing, aka Ben Grimm of the Fantastic Four have going on. These two love to fight and compete with one another, and pull pranks whenever they can get away with it. But at the end of the day, their rivalry is really all fun and laughs. For the most part, it seems they enjoy pushing one another's buttons because they know each other so well and love each other so much. And obviously, if you know someone really well and you love them really well, you're probably pretty good at pushing their buttons when you want to. It's maybe the cutest and most earnest kind of sibling superhero rivalry on this list, despite the fact that yes, Johnny and Ben aren't blood-related siblings. Being part of the Fantastic Four, though, does mean being part of a family. Number 7, Spider-Man and Wolverine. Spider-Man and Wolverine have an even deeper rivalry, probably because they have even less in common, it would seem, on the outside than even the bizarre duo of Logan and Wade. Logan and Wade actually at least have some shared experience in acting as mercenaries and both having their heads scrambled by people, and they've both been known to behave like anti-heroes, whereas Spider-Man and Wolverine are almost kinda on two opposite sides when it comes to their approach to heroics. The one thing they seem to share, though, I will say, is that their heart is definitely both in the right place. But just like Daredevil and Punisher and even more so perhaps, these two struggle to see eye to eye when it comes to their approach and ideology in regards to how best to be a superhero and their heroic tactics. Number 6. Hulk and Bruce Banner. These two were really at odds recently in Donny Cates' Hulk series, and their history has been a tumultuous one, with sometimes the Hulk or Bruce being painted as the villain and the other being painted as the hero. However, in reality, both Bruce Banner and the Hulk have acted as heroes before, and also acted as villains, and they've also even worked together before. In Immortal Hulk, they seem to find some sense of balance and harmony, but this didn't end up lasting too long, as Bruce then turns on the Hulk personas within himself, imprisoning the Hulk to use him as an engine for his space adventures. Odds are good, no matter how many times these two end up making peace with one another, that they will eventually always return to butting heads at some point. Number 5. Storm and Emma Frost. A lot of people obsess over the rivalry over Scott Summers, aka Cyclops, that exists between Jean Grey and Emma Frost in the comics, but this rivalry between Emma and Aurora runs honestly even deeper. It comes from a time when Emma was still a villain, the White Queen of the Hellfire Club, and ended up body swapping with Storm. Needless to say, Storm was not very happy with the White Queen and held a grudge against her for years thereafter, the whole body swap incident. Body swapping is so creepy in stories, like that is a total violation of someone's privacy in like a whole other way. Talk about evil. I mean, I guess unless you are like consensually swapping bodies with someone, then it's just kind of weird with the potential, I suppose, to even be cool. Even in the Jean Grey and Emma Frost giant-sized comic that came out only a few years ago, it was shown that Storm still thinks of Emma as her rival, even though they are both now technically allies and both sit on Krakoa's Quiet Council.
Number 4. Daredevil and The Punisher. When it comes to the good guys of the Marvel Universe, there's somewhat of a spectrum of morality, with most of them falling somewhere in the middle. While a lot of characters like, say, Iron Man aren't kill crazy, they also aren't above taking the lives of their enemies if it comes down to it. On opposite ends of the spectrum, you have Daredevil and The Punisher. While Daredevil is strictly against murder and will avoid it at all costs, only resorting to it when under mind control or when he has literally no other choice, like when he killed the helicopter pilot who was using a minigun to turn Hell's Kitchen into a war zone and killing several people a minute in Daredevil number 233. On the other end of the spectrum is Frank Castle, otherwise known as the Punisher, who goes out of his way to murder as many criminals as possible, believing that people are incapable of changing. This difference of methodology, of course, has caused the two to come to blows several times over the years, as Daredevil tries to stop crimes and put criminals away with the legal system, while Frank has no faith in the system and usually tries to kill every criminal he comes across. The two are known to try and convince one another that their way is better, sometimes in very extreme ways, such as in Punisher Volume 5 number 3, where Frank chained Daredevil to a roof with a gun taped to his hand, telling him that he must shoot him in order to prevent him from killing a criminal. This rivalry has spawned some of the best moments in each of the characters' history, as well as a mini-series called Daredevil vs. Punisher, which is of course completely devoted to this rivalry.
Number 3. She-Hulk and Titania. She-Hulk and Titania have a very interesting relationship in the comics, and while they may be on more friendly terms now in regards to Titania moving away from being a true criminal, as so many Marvel villains have done in recent years, these two ladies are still rivals. In fact, they even came together to kind of celebrate the love of their rivalry in a friendly manner by creating, in essence, a fight club for others to get together and blow off steam. Although initially Jen did suggest that it's just kind of a fight club between them two exclusively. Titania and She-Hulk make for excellent rivals because they are both fierce, determined characters who are well known for their strength and indomitability. In fact, they have a lot in common. And when they fight one another, because they are both so tough, neither has to really worry about actually hurting the other, as they are fairly evenly matched. Also, you know their rivalry is iconic when it's used as the opener for a She-Hulk series, which it was recently in the 2022 She-Hulk comic by Rainbow Rowell. And if you aren't reading this comic, by the way, you need to be. Trust me.
Number 2. The Thing and the Hulk. Although many would say that the Hulk is the strongest one there is, Ben Grimm might disagree. These two super strong heroes have gone toe-to-toe several times over the years, starting their conflict over 60 years ago in Fantastic Four number 25. Their fights are always an event fans look forward to, with no clear and consistent winner ever really being named. In their first conflict, Ben was able to come out on top, likely because of his ability to keep a cool, clear head throughout the fight. In their next fight, in Incredible Hulk number 122, Hulk had to fight the entire Fantastic Four, but managed to hold his own before eventually being taken down. Their next one-on-one bout in Fantastic Four number 112 ended with the Hulk landing a devastating and almost lethal right hook on the Thing, giving him his first victory. They fought again in Fantastic Four number 167, but Ben began transforming back into his human form, giving Hulk a massive advantage. Their next fight in Fantastic Four 320 ended in a victory for the Thing, but Hulk was in his Grey Hulk form, thereby being half as strong as his usual green self. himself. Grey Hulk had a rematch with the Thing in Incredible Hulk 350, which went more his way. They've had a couple more bouts since then, with the Hulk usually coming out on top, but despite this, the two have become friends, bonding over their experience as normal men transformed into something more. In issue 49 of The Immortal Hulk, we got to see how, despite everything, Ben will prioritize their friendship over their conflict when he took the time to comfort a Hulk who had just been attacked by the Avengers and make sure that he was okay before helping the Green Goliath in his quest to defeat the One Below All and the Leader. Despite this, it is likely only a matter of time before we see these two come to blows once again in the Marvel Universe.
Number 1. Wolverine and Cyclops. It's a rivalry as old as time. Well, not as old as time actually, but as old as Wolverine's first appearance almost. Wolverine and Cyclops have been known to butt heads almost since Wolverine first joined the team. Shortly after Wolverine joined up with the X-Men, Cyclops seemed to struggle with Wolverine's more aggressive nature, causing conflict between the two. And soon after joining, Wolverine developed feelings for Jean Grey, aka Marvel Girl, Scott's girlfriend, which also complicated the two superheroes' relationship and feelings towards one another. While they have always been rivals though, Scott and Logan are also like brothers. They've been through hell together as fellow X-Men, and while they may not always agree, they definitely also are more often willing to work together to help innocents and their fellow mutants. And that is a matter they do at least always agree on, that of helping those who need it. At the end of the day, they're both superheroes, and while they may fight from time to time, they will inevitably end up working back together as teammates, friends, and basically mutant brothers.
Alright, coming in at number 10 is Captain Marvel and Rogue. A lot of people may not even know about this one, because I definitely did not until a couple of months ago. The mutant Rogue first started out as a villain in Marvel Comics. That part I did know. She was part of Mystique's Brotherhood of Evil Mutants, and one of their first attacks on the Avengers involved ambushing a recently returned Carol Danvers. Rogue, who was still learning to use her abilities at the time, accidentally fully absorbed both Danvers' memories and her powers. The attack completely drained Carol of her powers and erased her mind, and then just to add insult to injury, Rogue immediately decided to chuck Carol off the Golden Gate Bridge. Luckily, Spider-Woman was there and able to rescue her, and Professor Xavier was able to restore Carol's memories, but it wasn't complete. The actual emotional connection to those memories, as well as to her family and friends, was completely gone. Carol remembered things, but it was more like watching a show about her life instead of actually living it. Carol regained her powers eventually, but Carol's life was destroyed by a scared young woman who then had to deal with the consequences of her actions and the harm it caused to both of them. Number 9. Professor X and Magneto. These two are like the perfect definition of frenemies. While they have massive respect for each other and almost view each other as brothers, their ideologies are just in complete contrast, and it has put them on opposite ends of the battlefield more often than not. Now, before you jump on me in the comments, I know Magneto is basically a hero now in recent years, and the two of them became allies more than enemies. That's why they're all the way up here at number 9, but to deny the fact that they were one of the biggest rivalries in Marvel Comics, it's just plain wrong. They basically fight for the same thing, the betterment of mutant kind. But while Xavier believes they should try to work with humans, Magneto believes mutants to be the future of the world and the dominant species. They are both right and they are both wrong, and they both have huge respect and love for one another. It's such a great dynamic. If you're enjoying this list so far, be sure to drop a like to let us know that this is the kind of content you want to see. Number 8. Venom and Carnage. Now, I don't know about you guys, but the motivations for symbiotes seem to be very simple. Obviously, their motivations are fueled by their hosts, but without the host, a symbiote seems to just be a very primal being. So, when Venom's offspring bonded with a complete psychopath in Cletus Cassidy, the desire to end lives and cause destruction seemed to be almost double for them both. But for Venom and Eddie Brock, while they started out as straight up villains, Eddie and the other hosts have instilled this sort of odd desire to do good in Venom in his own weird way. Venom can be bad, but he is good enough to know that Carnage is really bad, and Venom would even put aside his hatred for Spider-Man to fight Carnage alongside the web-slinger the first time they ever came to blows. And that's a pretty serious thing for Venom. Carnage has been Venom's #1 enemy ever since. Number 7. Daredevil and Bullseye. I've said before that I think Bullseye is one of the more ruthless villains in Marvel Comics. He's just not a nice guy, and the evidence for that statement can be found in his history with Daredevil. While the Kingpin, Wilson Fisk, could also stand as Daredevil's biggest rival, it was never personal between the two of them. But for Bullseye, their rivalry became more and more personal, especially in Daredevil number 161, when we learned that Bullseye had become completely obsessed with his defeats to Daredevil even hurting others like Black Widow just to get at Matt Murdock. But then he just lost it when the Man Without Fear defeated him yet again. He now started to see strangers on the street as Daredevil and would send them to the afterlife. He's absolutely nuts, but I'd be remiss if I didn't say the rivalry became more personal for Daredevil as well, especially after 2 separate occasions where Bullseye had ended the lives of Matt Murdock's biggest love interests in Elektra and Karen Page. Number 6, Sentry and the Void. Let's try a different approach to this. What about a character whose own rival is himself, or an aspect of himself? Honestly, with the sheer level of power possessed by the Sentry, it almost makes sense for his main rival to be his darkest aspect, the Void. When Robert Reynolds injected himself with an experimental golden Sentry serum, an offshoot and supposed improvement of the super soldier serum, he gained the power of 1,000,000 exploding suns and became one of the world's greatest superheroes. Until the Void arrived. The Void nearly took out Sentry's sidekick, Scout. It drove the Hulk into a rampage and took the lives of over 1,000,000 people in Manhattan. When Reynolds realized this was his own dark persona, he enlisted Doctor Strange and Reed Richards, and together they wiped the memory of Sentry from everyone in the world, including themselves. Let me know a character who you think could be a better rival for the Sentry, other than the Hulk, down below.
At number 5, we've got Spider-Man vs. Wolverine. This face-off has such a crazy build-up that it actually needs its own issue called, you guessed it, Spider-Man vs. Wolverine. They fight because Spider-Man finds himself caught up in an ongoing operation that Wolverine had been a part of for a long time before the events of this story. And it's, like I said, it's a long story, but basically this woman named Charlemagne is in such a predicament involving Russian assassins and basically an internal manhunt for her arrest, so she actually asks Wolverine to end it for her, to save her from going to a gulag. Spider-Man notices Logan is about to actually make her wish come true. He swoops in, and this is the last straw for Logan. This fight takes place in a graveyard of all places, leaving the 2 superheroes in a stalemate, each of them seriously threatening to end each other's life. But luckily the fight is broken up at the exact moment by a chopper with its spotlight on, and as this distraction has both of them gripped, someone creeps up on Spidey, who senses it and delivers a brutal punch. But unfortunately it wasn't Wolverine. Instead it was the woman he'd been trying to save, and the punch kills her. I mean, don't be too hard on yourself, Spidey, it's what she wanted, right? And even Logan acknowledges that she probably planned it that way. Okay, at number 4, it's the battle between Thor and Beta Ray Bill. This battle is pretty epic considering it's the fight that would determine whether or not Beta Ray Bill is worthy of Mjolnir, Thor's hammer. He'd already shown his worth by actually being able to pick it up, but that wasn't enough, as Thor fights back against his new contender. The battle rages into a river of lava, leaving both warriors exhausted, lying on an obsidian raft. But they float steadily towards a lava fall, waterfall made of lava, you know what I mean. Beta Ray Bill shows his worth further by saving an unconscious Thor from the deadly plunge. After all is said and done, the 2 warriors end in a draw, approaching Odin with the results. And instead of taking away Thor's hammer and handing it over to Bill, Odin offers him a brand new weapon called Stormbreaker. So it turns out okay in the end. But this is a battle for the history books, with 2 of the most powerful superheroes in the whole Marvel Universe facing off for the glory of respect and worthiness. Alright, here we are at number 3 with Captain America versus Iron Man, or just the Civil War storyline. I'm gonna match those 2 into one because they're basically the same conflict. But Iron Man and Captain America have had a deep bond for quite some time, but there are some times when they have disagreements that turn into physical altercations. One of these fights takes place in the Armor Wars storyline when Tony Stark learns that his own technology has been stolen to create super soldiers. And when Captain America sees a chance to preserve the armor, Iron Man gets a bit physical since he wants the technology to stay exclusively to him. So Iron Man knocks out Cap with an electrical charge and leaves the room. But this altercation doesn't even compare to the fight they have during the Civil War event, which we all know has Iron Man and Captain America pitted against each other in their own factions. When Captain America goes in for a handshake in Civil War issue 3, he leaves an electron scrambler on Tony's hand, which immobilizes his whole suit, leaving him on the ground while the rest of the team faces off. But Tony isn't done and gets up to land a massive blow on Steve, tearing his mask and nearly severing his jawbone. It's sad to see old friends fight like this, but it definitely makes for a pretty exciting read. At number 2, we've got Batman vs. Superman. This turn of events is so impactful on the storyline we're used to that it was turned into a movie. These two had a relationship so tight they were like brothers, who sometimes fought. But most of the time these fights would be due to mind control, like in the Hush storyline when Superman is brainwashed by Poison Ivy and sent to attack Batman. But we all know the fight that really puts these two near the top of our list is the one in Frank Miller's Dark Knight Returns. This storyline, set in the future, depicts an older, more brutal Batman who is wreaking havoc against crime in Gotham. And when the government notices Batman acting out of sorts, they send Superman after him to put a stop to it. And this fight is epic. What really makes it cool is that you'd expect a human Batman to be totally outmatched by the Kryptonian alien Superman, but the matchup is more even than you'd expect. And it ends with the two in what seems like almost a draw. But that's where I'll leave it for the few of you who don't know what happens still. Needless to say, it's a pretty insane face-off, but I think it's fair to say that the world is better off with these heroes on the same side. Okay, finally at number 1, there's Avengers vs. X-Men. This showdown has happened before this new event coming out soon, it just didn't involve the Eternals. And of course the context will most likely be different. But in the original Avengers vs. X-Men event, the disagreements start with the two factions having opposing views on how to approach dealing with Phoenix Force. On one hand, the X-Men think the Phoenix Force will bring a rebirth to mutant species, a cause they have always felt very passionate about. But the Avengers are concerned that Phoenix Force will basically wipe out all life on Earth. When 5 of the X-Men are possessed by the Force, the battle then becomes more complicated, with this third team now involved. And what's good about this is that the Phoenix 5 then become a common enemy between the remaining X-Men and the Avengers, who start trying to take them out one by one. Eventually, it's just Cyclops with the Phoenix Force in him, and he basically gets turned into full-blown Dark Phoenix, putting an end to the fighting between the Avengers and the X-Men. Because you don't really have time to fight each other when there's a Dark Phoenix with a laser vision flying around.
Number 10, Squirrel Girl vs. Doctor Doom. When Squirrel Girl was new on the scene, she was still weirdly proving how OP of a character she was. Although any fight involving Squirrel Girl you would think would be super unfair in terms of her being completely outmatched. And you'd be right about these fights being unfair, but it's usually more often the other way around, with many of her opponents standing no chance against her. One of her first fights happened to go just like that, featuring the brilliant and dangerous Doctor Doom, who found himself quickly trounced by Squirrel Girl when she attacked him with squirrels, leaving him to be pretty much embarrassed about this fight forever onward. Number 9, Captain America vs. The Punisher. This was a very one-sided fight, not only on paper, but also just in terms of how this all went down. Two villains, Goldbug and Plunderer, were willing to join Captain America's side of the fight in Civil War, revealing that even the supervillain community was concerned about what would happen if Iron Man won. They might be villains, but they were people too, and were terrified at the prospect of the nation becoming a police state. Punisher didn't like the idea of working with villains though, and shot down their offer by literally gunning them down. This resulted in a pissed off Cap beginning a brutal fight with Frank, who refused to fight back because, well, Captain America was one of the good guys? So based on how this fight shook out, I don't know if you'd actually be able to tell. Captain America beats the Punisher within an inch of his life over the course of a handful of panels, and also calls him a murderous piece of trash. Wow, that is pretty brutal, Cap. Alright friends, before we move on to this next point, just a quick reminder to give this video a thumbs up if you're enjoying it. It really does help us out here at the channel. Number 8, The Punisher vs. Daken. In this fight, Punisher once again is brutally defeated by his opponent, though this time a lot more permanently. Punisher ends up being no match for Daken, who makes quick work of him despite all his guns. I mean, we already knew this was how it was going to end, didn't we? Considering Daken takes after his dad, Logan, and has a pretty intense healing factor. The real impressive thing though is just how much of a beating and stabbing Frank withstands before Daken inevitably takes the victory. In the end, Daken decapitates Frank Castle, killing him, though Frank of course would later come back as the monster Frankencastle, and then later be returned to his old self once again. Number 7, Black Canary vs. Superman. Pretty much any Injustice fight against Superman is brutal because of how powerful Superman is known for being, and of course how crazed and evil he is here. Black Canary attempts to take down the big bad Superman in Injustice, and at least she came armed with a gun and a kryptonite bullet to do so. Still, this fight ends how you'd expect it to, with Black Canary being no match for the Man of Steel. Well, almost anyways. She successfully shoots him, taking him out momentarily, but he is then chosen as a Yellow Lantern because of his immense ability to instill fear in others, which honestly I agree. Although she may be taken out by Superman's heat vision right after that with a shot straight to the gut, she does still end up getting a different kind of victory through her defeat. A consolation prize at least. She's wearing contacts that have the ability to record everything she sees, allowing people to see just how much of a brutal tyrant Superman has become, because they broadcast it everywhere. Also, I feel like if you actually put in contacts that had cameras in them, even in the future, even if like the technology was amazing, they still have to be pretty thick. Like, I have a hard enough trouble putting regular contacts in my eyes on days when I have to do that. Number 6, Hawkgirl vs. Barbastos. Granted, this was Nth Metal Enhanced Hawkgirl, but still, if you had told me this was how Dark Knight's metal was going to go down, I wouldn't have believed you. In the end, Hawkgirl was the one to defeat Barbastos in the comic. Though of course, that wouldn't be completely where that story would end, as we saw with the continuation in Dark Knight's Death Metal. However brief the fight between Hawkgirl and the Bat God was, it was still pretty cool that she was the one who ended up taking him down. Even if it was only because of, well, the element X-Blade that she was really able to do this. Barbados is basically a god, so on paper this fight in general just sounds pretty crazy.
Number 5, Zatana and Catwoman. Oh boy, does Catwoman have reason to have beef with Zatana? These two ended up in a fight with one another after it was revealed that Catwoman may have only become a full-fledged hero as a result of Zatana manipulating her mind. Because of this revelation, Catwoman turned on Zatana, with the two getting into a physical fight. In the end, Selina was rightly pissed at Z after learning this, feeling like she had never in her life been more violated than she was when Zatana changed her against her will. It also made Catwoman question whether or not she was actually the hero she had become at this point, since she'd obviously had no choice in that matter. What a terrible thing to do to someone. Number 4, Jean Grey and Emma Frost. A feud that feels as old as time, really, or at least almost as old as Emma Frost's character. Initially, this feud started because Emma was a villain in the comics, being the White Queen of the Hellfire Club. This made her a rival to not just Jean, but also all of the X-Men. Emma was actually introduced around the time of the Dark Phoenix saga too, and was one of those present and involved when Mastermind took Jean and brainwashed her into joining the Hellfire Club as its Black Queen. Of course, this wasn't really Jean, but the Phoenix, who had taken on Jean's likeness, both in personality and in appearance. What really caused these two women to dislike one another though took place when Emma had reformed and become a hero, and that happened mainly as a result of Emma having a psychic affair with Jean's husband, Scott Summers, aka Cyclops, during a time when their marriage was strained. Hence the feud. Number 3, Superman and Shazam. One of the most iconic feuds in comics isn't necessarily a real narrative feud. I mean, these two don't typically go after one another to fight needlessly in terms of themselves as characters. They don't really have much of a reason to be jealous of the other or even dislike the other, but they do end up pitted against each other, often in alternate realities, and just because people like to see who would win if they got in a fight. And actually, their feud extends back in history to like the creation of these characters, which were considered rivals in terms of them being with two different publishers at the time in comics. In most cases, because these two are so evenly matched, generally their fights end in either a standstill, a stalemate, or with Superman implied as the victor. While Superman might be weak to Shazam's magic, Shazam is often forced to transform back into Billy by Superman's tactics. So, number 2, X-Men and the Eternals. Though not all X-Men and not all Eternals are involved in this one. This feud is actually what sets up the Avengers vs. X-Men vs. Eternals Judgment Day event. It all goes down because of the reveal to the world that mutants have the power to resurrect themselves, which is happening now in modern comics, essentially meaning that mutants have become immortal beings. Druig, who at the time is Prime Eternal, thinks this makes mutants far too powerful and labels them as deviants, which obviously deviants are the people that the Eternals must always fight against, which apparently isn't that much of a stretch either, because genetic-wise, mutants are similar enough to deviants for the deviants to successfully be able to use the gates on Krakoa. Labeling them as deviants means the Eternals go to war with the mutants, and of course, their premier superhero team, the X-Men. Hence, X-Men and Eternals fighting each other. Number 1, Green Lantern and Batman. At this point, Batman pretty much has beef with, well, almost any Green Lantern you can think of. At least most of the Green Lanterns who are Earth-based, I would say. The most famous feud between Batman and Green Lantern, though, is the one between Bruce and Guy Gardner. Guy Gardner is basically the epitome of everything that kinda irks Batman in regards to a fellow hero's attitude. He's brash, bold, grating, and often seen as undisciplined. At least, you know, in comparison to someone as regimented as Batman, I would say. When Guy Guy found himself in the Justice League, and under Batman's leadership, the two clashed to the point that Guy actually decided to challenge Batman, hoping to replace the Dark Knight as the new leader of the team. Well, this didn't end very well for Guy, who was knocked out famously in one punch by Batman. Although it should be noted that this was Guy fighting without the power of the Green Lantern, as he egotistically chose to take off his power ring and not fight with it. So yeah, which is pretty Guy Gardner, I gotta say.
Number 10. Squirrel Girl vs. Doctor Doom. When Squirrel Girl was new on the scene, she was still weirdly proving how OP of a character she was. Although any fight involving Squirrel Girl you would think would be super unfair in terms of her being completely outmatched. And you'd be right about these fights being unfair, but it's usually more often the other way around, with many of her opponents standing no chance against her. One of her first fights happened to go just like that, featuring the brilliant and dangerous Doctor Doom, who found himself quickly trounced by Squirrel Girl when she attacked him with squirrels, leaving him to be pretty much embarrassed about this fight forever onward. Number 9. Captain America vs. The Punisher. This was a very one-sided fight, not only on paper but also just in terms of how this all went down. Two villains, Goldbug and Plunderer, were willing to join Captain America's side of the fight in Civil War, revealing that even the supervillain community was concerned about what would happen if Iron Man won. They might be villains, but they were people too, and were terrified at the prospect of the nation becoming a police state. Punisher didn't like the idea of working with villains though, and shot down their offer by literally gunning them down. This resulted in a pissed off Cap beginning a brutal fight with Frank, who refused to fight back because, well, Captain America was one of the good guys? So based on how this fight shook out, I don't know if you'd actually be able to tell. Captain America beats the Punisher within an inch of his life over the course of a handful of panels, and also calls him a murderous piece of trash. Wow, that is pretty brutal, Cap. Alright friends, before we move on to this next point, just a quick reminder to give this video a thumbs up if you're enjoying it. It really does help us out here at the channel. Number 8. The Punisher vs. Daken. In this fight, Punisher once again is brutally defeated by his opponent, though this time a lot more permanently. Punisher ends up being no match for Daken, who makes quick work of him despite all his guns. I mean, we already knew this was how it was going to end, didn't we? Considering Daken takes after his dad Logan and has a pretty intense healing factor. The real impressive thing though is just how much of a beating and stabbing Frank withstands before Daken inevitably takes the victory. In the end, Daken decapitates Frank Castle, killing him, though Frank of course would later come back as the monster Frankencastle and then later be returned to his old self once again. Number 7. Black Canary vs. Superman. Pretty much any Injustice fight against Superman is brutal because of how powerful Superman is known for being, and of course how crazed and evil he is here. Black Canary attempts to take down the big bad Superman in Injustice, and at least she came armed with a gun and a kryptonite bullet to do so. Still, this fight ends how you'd expect it to, with Black Canary being no match for the Man of Steel. Well, almost anyways. She successfully shoots him, taking him out momentarily, but he is then chosen as a Yellow Lantern because of his immense ability to instill fear in others, which honestly I agree. Although she may be taken out by Superman's heat vision right after that with a shot straight to the gut, she does still end up getting a different kind of victory through her defeat. A consolation prize at least. She's wearing contacts that have the ability to record everything she sees, allowing people to see just how much of a brutal tyrant Superman has become, because they broadcast it everywhere. Also, I feel like if you actually put in contacts that had cameras in them, even in the future, even if like the technology was amazing, they still have to be pretty thick. Like, I have a hard enough trouble putting regular contacts in my eyes on days when I have to do that. Number 6. Hawkgirl vs. Barbastos. Granted, this was Nth Metal Enhanced Hawkgirl, but still, if you had told me this was how Dark Knight's metal was going to go down, I wouldn't have believed you. In the end, Hawkgirl was the one to defeat Barbastos in the comic. Though of course, that wouldn't be completely where that story would end, as we saw with the continuation in Dark Knight's Death Metal. However brief the fight between Hawkgirl and the Bat God was, it was still pretty cool that she was the one who ended up taking him down. Even if it was only because of, well, the element X-Blade that she was really able to do this. Barbados is basically a god, so on paper this fight in general just sounds pretty crazy. Number 5, The Punisher versus Wolverine and SpiderMan and Daredevil. Now you might expect you know how this one should go, but let's also remember that this is Garth Ennis writing Punisher, so yeah. It doesn't really go down the way you'd think. Instead, the Punisher manipulates the three heroes briefly into turning against one another when they seek to bring him in. These three are hoping to team up to essentially arrest Punisher and then turn him over to the courts and, you know, get him convicted with like the law and all of that stuff, even though Wolverine needs a bit of convincing when it comes to this approach at the beginning. Punisher takes out all three of these heroes, even managing to disable Spider-Man by convincing him that if he moves, bombs will go off. You'd think Spider-Man would actually be able to sense whether or not this was true, but I digress. I guess his spidey sense wasn't working that well that day. Number 4, Superman versus Batman. I mean, you'd think you know how this one should shake out, considering Batman is just a normal human with a bunch of money and, well, years of training. However, in Dark Knight Returns, we get to be pleasantly surprised. A normal man, even when as skilled as Bruce Wayne, you'd think would just be no match for Superman, especially as, well, he's getting on in years here, whereas Kal-El, while also being older, barely looks or seems to have aged at all. But Batman uses all of his strategic skills, knowledge, and his gadgets to help him win this fight. And man, does it go to show that you should never dismiss Batman just because he doesn't have conventional superpowers. Or superpowers at all. Batman has the best superpower, the superpower to know a ton about heroes because he does his homework. Number 3, The Punisher versus Sentry. During Dark Reign, Punisher refuses to stand by and let Norman Osborn become the world's new biggest and brightest hero, as S.H.I.E.L.D. is disbanded and Osborn becomes the head of its replacement organization, Hammer, and the new Dark Avengers team. Punisher aims to eliminate Norman Osborn, but standing in his way is the Sentry, who stops the Punisher's bullet mid-air as it soars towards Osborn's head. Sentry sets his sights on Frank, and, well, I think you can imagine how this one goes. Still, at least this fight is gratifying in the sense that it isn't over with like a 1-2 punch. Instead, we actually watch as the Punisher tries everything he can to try to defeat Sentry, knowing it's pretty much all hopeless, but refusing to give up. And he does all this while being brutalized by Robert, who initially just wants to talk it out and arrest Punisher without a fuss. So that's how Punisher is actually able to survive, because Sentry just wants to talk. Punisher's skills and weapons aren't what save him actually at the end of the day. He simply manages to get lucky when Robert doesn't call out his get out of jail attempt at bluffing. Thank goodness. Number 2, Superman versus Alfred Pennyworth. You would think you already know how this fight would shake out, but hey, it didn't go down quite the way most of us would expect when it happened in Injustice. After Superman broke Batman's back with the good old Bane snap over the knee move, he had a brief moment of regret as Batman called him out for being more monster than hero, for torturing him, all while claiming it was for the greater good. As Superman considers what he's just done, he turns to Alfred, who has approached him. However, Alfred didn't approach Superman to, you know, communicate any words of wisdom here or to help Clark come back around and like regain his senses and see the error of his ways. He came to teach Superman a lesson about attacking Bruce. Alfred used a pill which temporarily granted him the same level of strength as Superman, making this super uneven fight on paper a lot more even in reality. Using the element of surprise, Alfred was then able to beat Superman to a pulp while confessing that he was very disappointed at him before scooping up Bruce and taking him to safety. Reminding everyone that even when it comes to facing powerful foes like Superman, Alfred is still and will always be a badass. In case people forgot. Number 1, Squirrel Girl versus Galactus. I freaking love this fight, and I love that I started this list with Squirrel Girl and I'm ending it with her, even though this fight is super ridiculous. You wouldn't think someone like Squirrel Girl, whose powers include communicating with and controlling squirrels and sharp teeth, would be able to take on and even defeat the epic force of Galactus, who is nigh unstoppable and comes armed with the Power Cosmic, which basically allows you to do, well, whatever writers need whoever wields it to do. Power Cosmic, by the way, turns out does help Galactus to communicate in the vacuum of space as well. In the Unbeatable Squirrel Girl issue 4, Squirrel Girl defeats Galactus by realizing that the only way to defeat him is by offering him an alternate planet to devour other than Earth. She and Tippy Toe manage to access the databases in his ship's computers and find one that is covered in nuts, which they manage to convince Galactus are delicious and nutritious, full of calories, life energy. Life energy. As strange as this all sounds, the whole issue is pretty great when it comes to writing, so as weird as it sounds that Squirrel Girl was able to beat Galactus, it actually really makes sense in this context. And if you want to find out more about how this all actually happened, that Squirrel Girl beat Galactus, you can check it out in the Unbeatable Squirrel Girl issue 4 yourself.